On October 20th, 2025, the global digital network experienced a sudden and unprecedented shutdown. Applications like Snapchat ceased functioning, financial institutions went offline, and server farms in Virginia became eerily silent, akin to a meticulously arranged line of dominoes toppling in the absence of light. Almost simultaneously, an extraterrestrial entity, identified as 3i Atlas, vanished from our view, obscured by the sun. We are confronted with two distinct yet temporally proximate disappearances, one within the digital realm, the other in the vastness of space. Is this a mere coincidence, or is it evidence of a deliberate orchestration? This evening we embark on an investigation, tracing the connections between the world's most critical data hubs and a celestial traveler to determine if an external force has indeed reached out and disconnected our technological world. Please remain with us until the conclusion, for the revelations we uncover will fundamentally alter your perception of the recent disruption to our digital infrastructure. If these enigmatic events have sparked as much curiosity in you as they have in me, I urge you not to linger in uncertainty. Click the like button and subscribe immediately to ensure you remain at the forefront of this developing narrative as it unfolds in real time. Share your thoughts in the comments, including your location, the current time there, and your opinion on whether the world is privy to the complete truth behind these seismic discoveries. Furthermore, if you wish to amplify our pursuit of hidden truths, please disseminate this video across X, Facebook, Reddit, or even share it directly in your private conversations. We express our sincere gratitude for your unwavering support. It is your engagement that empowers us to delve into stories that others shy away from. Part 1. 2 periods of obscured vision, 1 week apart. Envision this scenario. You awaken on October 20th, 2025, only to find your mobile device is incapable of establishing a connection. Your banking application remains frozen, and your home surveillance camera is non-operational. Across the entire planet, countless individuals are met with endlessly rotating loading symbols on their screens. The internet, that invisible web we've intricately woven around our planet, akin to a secondary atmosphere, has sustained a critical injury. Major online services have become inaccessible. Snapchat, Fortnite, Amazon's virtual assistant Alexa, and various banking platforms are struggling to function. The very pulse of our digital civilization has faltered. This event alone is profoundly unsettling, the kind that generates widespread news coverage and prompts governmental inquiries. However, the situation takes a more peculiar turn. Approximately 24 hours later, on October 21st, 2025, another significant event transpires. This time it's not a digital entity that vanishes, but rather an extraterrestrial object from our sky. An interstellar visitor, a cosmic wanderer originating from beyond our solar system, slips behind the sun. From our vantage point on Earth, this phenomenon is known as solar conjunction, rendering the object entirely invisible to us. The entity in question is designated 3i Atlas, representing only the third confirmed object of interstellar origin ever detected entering our solar system. It has been traversing towards the sun at velocities so extreme that they would vaporize any material known to humankind. Precisely as it reaches its closest proximity to the sun, and coincidentally as our ability to track it diminishes, our global internet infrastructure experiences a complete collapse. We are presented with two distinct periods of obscured vision, one digital, one astronomical, occurring within a span of roughly 48 hours. You are likely experiencing the same thought as any logical individual. A mere coincidence. Random occurrences that happen to overlap, much like two strangers passing each other on opposite sides of a street. The universe is vast and events are constantly unfolding. Our innate tendency to identify patterns often leads us to perceive connections where none truly exist. Experts in the fields of technology and astrophysics, those who possess a deep understanding of cloud infrastructure and celestial mechanics, will assert that there is no discernible physical link between these events. Amazon Web Services has attributed the outage to internal system malfunctions, while astronomers maintain that the celestial body is too distant and too diminutive to exert any influence on Earth's technological systems. The official narrative concludes, case closed, nothing more to investigate. However, can we truly see in this situation? That is precisely the crux of the matter. At the very instant we should have been meticulously observing this interstellar visitor, documenting its behavior as it navigated the inner solar system, our network infrastructure failed. And at the precise moment this visitor disappeared behind the sun, creating an observational blackout that would persist for days or even weeks, we were preoccupied with restoring our service, preventing us from looking upward. This narrative is not about what definitively occurred. It is about what remained unseen, what continues to be unseen, and why this obscurity holds a significance far greater than we might initially comprehend. Our investigation will explore three distinct avenues. The first is purely technical. What precisely caused the failure within the cloud infrastructure? How do cascading failures propagate? Why can a single data center region in Northern Virginia impact services across 6 continents? The second avenue is astronomical. What exactly is 3i Atlas? Where did it originate? What are the consequences when an interstellar object approaches the Sun? And why should the timing of its disappearance warrant our attention? The third avenue, which may cause some unease, is speculative. What if the timing was not coincidental? What if a conscious entity or entities deliberately chose this moment? What if there are operations, whether human or otherwise, that benefit from simultaneous periods of dual obscurity? Moments when both our digital perceptions and our cosmic awareness are simultaneously rendered inert? Allow me to clarify the scope of this investigation. You will receive factual information, confirmed technical data, astronomical observations, and expert opinions. You will also encounter speculative analyses, clearly identified as such, exploring a spectrum of possibilities ranging from simple infrastructure failures to more extraordinary hypotheses. You will gain a framework for understanding system vulnerabilities, the inherent fragility of systems we often take for granted, and those peculiar junctures where the cosmos and our technology appear to communicate in ways we do not fully grasp. What you will not receive is definitive certainty. This story will not be neatly resolved, as it is still in the process of unfolding. The celestial object remains behind the sun as we speak. The comprehensive analysis of the network outage has not yet been released. We are presently within that blind spot, collectively gazing at shadows and attempting to discern their origin. Scientists correctly advise that correlation does not equate to causation. Two events occurring in proximity do not inherently imply one caused the other. This is a valid point. However, correlation can necessitate investigation. It can prompt us to pose questions, follow discernible threads, and ascertain where they lead. Because when it comes to blind spots, they remain such only if we choose not to look beyond them. Imagine you are monitoring 2 distinct systems. One system meticulously tracks your digital infrastructure, the vast network of servers, routers, and cables that facilitate global information flow. The other system observes celestial bodies, comets, asteroids, and visitors from distant star systems. Both of these systems are highly sophisticated, possess built-in redundancies, and are the culmination of decades of engineering advancements and billions of dollars in investment. Now picture both of these monitoring systems ceasing to function within a 48-hour period. One system fails due to a technical malfunction, while the other becomes inoperable due to the predictable geometry of celestial movement, the object passing behind the sun. Your digital vital signs flatline and your cosmic observational feed vanishes from the screen simultaneously. Would you dismiss this as mere happenstance, or would you deem it worthy of investigation? The implications of this situation extend far beyond what might initially appear. This is not solely about a single network outage or a solitary comet. It concerns the recognition of recurring patterns in the failure of complex systems. It is about comprehending the inherent vulnerabilities within our increasingly centralized infrastructure. It is about acknowledging that we inhabit a universe that occasionally presents us with the unexpected. It speaks to the growing realization that our technologically advanced civilization, despite its numerous redundancies and safety measures, has inadvertently created single points of failure capable of triggering catastrophic consequences across the entire planet within minutes. And it underscores the humbling reality that even with our advanced telescopes, satellites, and deep space communication networks, there remain moments when we are utterly incapable of observing events occurring within our own solar system. We are more frequently than we care to admit navigating with only partial vision. Therefore, let us commence with what we do know, beginning with the precise moment when everything ceased to function. Part 2. The anatomy of the outage. Initial reports began to emerge around 3:11 in the morning, Eastern Time on October 20th, 2025. If you happen to be awake during those early hours, perhaps scrolling through social media or checking your device before dawn, you might have noticed an unusual sluggishness. Applications were not loading as expected. Then the trickle of reports transformed into a deluge. Down Detector, a platform that aggregates user-submitted outage reports, became overwhelmed with alerts resembling a densely populated Christmas tree. Thousands of complaints were registered for Snapchat. Fortnite players were unable to connect to the game servers. Transactions initiated via Venmo were left in a state of digital limbo. Amazon's Ring doorbell cameras went offline and Alexa ceased responding to verbal commands. Online banking portals froze and streaming services experienced significant disruptions. Within an hour, it became evident that this was not an isolated incident affecting a single service. Rather, it was a systemic event originating from a singular point of failure, spreading outwards like cracks forming on the surface of ice. That critical point of failure was identified as Amazon Web Services' US East 1 region, a cloud computing hub located in Northern Virginia. For those unfamiliar with cloud infrastructure, consider it in this context. The majority of the Internet no longer resides on individual computers. Instead, it is hosted within immense data centers. Vast facilities filled with servers owned by corporations such as Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. These servers are the backbone for everything from your preferred applications to critical corporate databases and even governmental systems. They are organized into geographical clusters known as regions, which collaborate to provide computing power, data storage, and network connectivity. US East 1 stands as one of the most established and expansive of these regions, a foundational segment that supports an enormous volume of Internet traffic. When it encounters difficulties, the impact is felt globally. When it collapses, the world effectively halts. Amazon Web Services officially cited increased error rates and latency issues within its US East 1 region as the cause. Their status updates identified the root of the problem as challenges with DNS resolution, internal monitoring subsystems, and issues affecting DynamoDB endpoints. To translate this technical terminology, the systems responsible for locating and connecting computers on the network began to malfunction. The systems tasked with monitoring the health of these operations could no longer provide accurate information. Furthermore, the databases that underpin many applications for data storage and retrieval became inaccessible. This confluence of interconnected failures created a perfect storm, each issue exacerbating the others. However, the sheer destructive potential of this event lies in its interconnectedness. Modern Internet architecture is fundamentally built upon dependencies. Your banking application, for instance, does not communicate solely with your bank's servers. It relies on third-party services for identity verification, routes traffic through content delivery networks, and makes numerous application programming interface (API) calls to a multitude of other systems. Many of these systems, in turn, depend on AWS US East 1 for crucial functionalities. Consequently, when this region begins to falter, the repercussions extend beyond services directly hosted within it. The failure propagates outwards in waves, affecting every dependent service. Imagine this scenario as a keystone in an architectural arch. The dislodgement of a single stone can cause the entire structure to destabilize. The inherently global nature of the Internet means that a failure originating in Northern Virginia can simultaneously incapacitate services in Tokyo, London, Sydney, and São Paulo. This occurs because we have constructed a system where an excessive number of pathways converge through a single vulnerable point. The Guardian newspaper aptly characterized this outage as a stark illustration of how Internet users are beholden to a limited number of providers. This is not an exaggeration. 3 major corporations, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, collectively dominate the global cloud computing infrastructure. When one of them stumbles, millions of services invariably falter alongside them. The redundancies we have implemented, including backup systems, fail-safes, and multiple availability zones, along with sophisticated engineering, are not always sufficient. This is because the redundancies themselves rely on underlying systems that are also susceptible to failure. The monitoring tools designed to detect problems can themselves break down. Automated recovery systems require input from monitoring tools that may be non-operational. It's a cascading chain of systems, and when the foundation fractures, everything built upon it is jeopardized. What remains unknown is perhaps more intriguing than what has been revealed. Amazon has not yet released a detailed forensic timeline precisely outlining the sequence of failures within its infrastructure. There has been no public indication of a malicious cyber attack, nor any concrete evidence suggesting deliberate sabotage of the outage. However, the absence of evidence is not, in itself, evidence of absence, particularly when the comprehensive investigation is ongoing. We do not know with certainty which systems failed first, which failures were symptomatic rather than causative, or if any anomalous patterns were present in the error logs that might suggest factors beyond routine technical issues. We are uncertain whether this was purely a software-related problem, or if hardware malfunctions also played a role. It is also unclear if any security breaches occurred that might have been masked by the ensuing chaos of the outage itself. Third-party monitoring services, such as Thousand Eyes, observed the failure from outside Amazon's network and corroborated the extensive scope of the disruption. However, their perspective is inherently limited. They can identify the observable symptoms, such as packet loss and connection timeouts, but they lack visibility into the internal workings of Amazon's infrastructure to ascertain the fundamental root causes. This is analogous to witnessing someone collapse in the street. One can see they have fallen, but without a more thorough examination, it's impossible to determine if it was a heart attack, a stroke, or another ailment. That critical examination is currently underway, conducted behind closed doors in Amazon's conference rooms and by regulatory bodies that are beginning to voice concerns about the concentration of power within the cloud computing sector. Therefore, we can confidently state the following. On October 20th, 2025, a critical component of the planet's internet infrastructure experienced a cascading failure that resulted in a global disruption of services lasting for several hours. The technical cause involved multiple interconnected system failures within a single geographical region. The impact was far-reaching, affecting services from social media to financial transactions to home automation systems. The restoration of services required significant time, even with thousands of engineers working tirelessly to re-establish connectivity. Furthermore, the vulnerability exposed by this event, namely the fragility of our centralized internet architecture, remains largely unaddressed. We have documented the symptoms and identified the affected entity, but we have not yet fully comprehended the underlying cause of the affliction. Now let us pivot to the celestial aspect of this narrative and discuss the visitor that chose this precise juncture to disappear from our sight. Part 3. 3I Atlas, the Cosmic Visitor, and the Solar Blind Zone. On July 1st, 2025, astronomers affiliated with the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, or ATLAS, detected an extraordinary phenomenon. A novel object was observed traversing our solar system, exhibiting characteristics unlike the comets and asteroids we routinely encounter. This object's trajectory indicated it was moving away from the Sun's gravitational influence, suggesting an origin beyond the outermost reaches of our solar system. Subsequent observations confirmed the initial data, identifying this as an interstellar visitor, only the third such object ever definitively confirmed in human history. It was subsequently named 3I Atlas, with the 3I signifying its status as the third interstellar object. The preceding two were Oumuamua, a peculiar elongated object whose unusual acceleration pattern baffled scientists when it passed through our solar system in 2017, and Comet Borisov, a more conventionally shaped comet discovered in 2019. Now we had a third messenger from the expanse between stars, arriving unannounced and moving at remarkable speed. Interstellar objects, as their name implies, are celestial bodies that originate from outside our solar system. These are fragments of rock or ice or other materials, ejected from distant star systems. They drift through the galaxy for millions or billions of years until their paths bring them sufficiently close to our Sun for detection. Their rarity is not due to their non-existence, but rather to the immense vastness of space and the limitations of our observational capabilities in detecting small, rapidly moving objects. 3I Atlas likely embarked on its journey from a solar system far removed, perhaps orbiting a star barely visible to us, having been ejected by gravitational forces from interactions with larger planetary bodies. It has been traversing the void ever since, traveling at speeds measured in tens of kilometers per second until it entered our celestial neighborhood, providing astronomers with a rare opportunity to study a visitor from another star system up close. The orbital path of 3I Atlas indicated it was approaching the Sun on a hyperbolic trajectory, signifying that it is not gravitationally bound to our solar system. It is a transient visitor, a cosmic tourist that will eventually depart and never return. Its closest approach to the Sun, known as perihelion, was calculated to occur around October 29, 2025 at an approximate distance of 1.36 astronomical units. An astronomical unit is defined as the mean distance between the Earth and the Sun, approximately 150 million kilometers. Therefore, 3I Atlas would pass within about 210 million kilometers of the Sun. While this might seem like a considerable distance in astronomical terms, it is sufficiently close for the Sun's intense heat and radiation to profoundly affect the object. This is precisely where observability becomes a significant challenge. As any celestial object approaches the Sun from Earth's perspective, a point is reached where the angular separation between the object, the Earth, and the Sun becomes exceedingly small. The technical term for this is solar elongation. When this angle diminishes to below approximately 30 degrees, ground-based telescopes face considerable difficulty in observing the object due to its proximity to the overwhelming glare of the Sun. It is akin to attempting to spot a firefly in the beam of a powerful spotlight. The extreme difference in brightness renders the fainter object imperceptible. For 3I Atlas, this period of observational blackout commenced around October 21, 2025, when it entered solar conjunction. From our viewpoint on Earth, the comet moved behind the Sun, rendering our telescopes effectively blind to its position and behavior. This blackout was projected to last for days, potentially extending to weeks, depending on the object's velocity and trajectory, until it emerged on the opposite side of the Sun and could be reacquired by observers. Why is this significant? Because interstellar objects are of immense scientific value, we rarely have opportunities to closely examine material originating from other solar systems. Every observation, every spectral analysis, and every captured image provides crucial data regarding conditions around distant stars, as well as the chemistry and physics governing planetary formation in diverse environments. 3I Atlas exhibited peculiar characteristics even during the limited observation window prior to its conjunction. Initial imaging revealed the development of a dust coma and tail as the Sun's heat began to sublimate ice and release dust from its surface. Spectroscopic analysis indicated a surprisingly high abundance of carbon dioxide and nickel, a composition that deviated significantly from what would be expected for comets formed within our own solar system. This object was demonstrably different, potentially carrying chemical signatures from a vastly different stellar environment. And precisely as its characteristics became more intriguing, as the Sun's thermal influence intensified, and the object began to exhibit signs of fragmentation or unusual behavior, it vanished behind the Sun, and our capacity to observe it was lost. I find an apt analogy for this situation to be that of a visitor arriving at your home. Someone arrives unexpectedly from a distant city, a person you have never encountered before. They are intriguing, possess unusual qualities, and carry items you have never seen. You begin to ask questions, seeking to understand their origin and their purpose. And just as the conversation becomes engaging, as you start to piece together their story, they walk behind a curtain, obscuring them from your view. They are still present, presumably continuing their activities, but your line of sight is now obstructed. For the duration of this period of invisibility, you have no insight into what is transpiring behind the curtain. It could be nothing significant, or it could be something extraordinary. You simply cannot know because you are unable to observe. This is precisely our current predicament with 3I Atlas. It entered the most active stage of its journey, the period when the Sun's solar radiation would be most intense and its behavior most unpredictable. During this phase, our ability to track it was lost. The celestial body is traveling at velocities typically cited as around 60 kilometers per second. which equates to approximately 130,000 miles per hour. No human creation moves at such an astonishing speed. If one could somehow stand on its surface, they would witness the sun expanding and growing considerably brighter as they drew near. The ambient temperature would skyrocket, causing ice to transform directly into vapor and dust to be ejected into space, forming the luminous tail that astronomers on Earth capture in their photographs. The environment surrounding an active comet is characterized by dynamism and turbulence, a continuous expulsion of matter and energy. For the majority of comets, this process is well understood, predictable, and documented through countless prior observations. However, interstellar comets present a different scenario. They originated elsewhere, under distinct circumstances, with unique chemical compositions. Their behavior could deviate from expectations. They might break apart differently, release gas at varying rates, or interact with the solar wind in unconventional ways. The lack of sufficient observation prevents us from knowing for certain. Every piece of data we can acquire is invaluable, making the inability to observe during conjunction a particularly vexing situation for astronomers. Now let's place this cosmic timeline alongside our earlier discussion. On October 20th, the Internet's foundational infrastructure experienced a collapse. On October 21st, the interstellar visitor entered solar conjunction and disappeared from our telescopic view. Two critical observation gaps emerged within a 24-hour span. One affected our digital connectivity and the other impaired our astronomical observational capacity. The practical consequence is identical. We lost the ability to monitor systems that we typically observe continuously. Our senses went dark, our awareness diminished. Whether a causal relationship exists between these events is a question we will investigate, but the timing alone establishes a narrative structure that is difficult to disregard. It represents a moment when both our technological senses and our cosmic observation capabilities experienced simultaneous failure or significant limitation. When such an occurrence happens, when two independent monitoring systems go offline concurrently, one must at least consider the possibility of what might be overlooked. What could transpire during a period when our vigilance is suspended? And who or what might stand to gain from such a temporary loss of sight? Let us examine these timelines more meticulously to understand why this overlap raises concerns among those who recognize patterns. Part 4. Timing and Visibility. Why the overlap causes concern. Allow me to illustrate the sequence of events chronologically. On October 20th, 2025, at approximately 3:11 in the morning, Eastern Time, Amazon Web Services' US East 1 region began to suffer critical malfunctions. Services started to falter, error rates surged, and a cascading collapse commenced. This event is documented, time-stamped, and verified by numerous monitoring services and millions of users who suddenly found themselves unable to access their applications. 24 hours later, on October 21st, 2025, at 3 minutes past 3 a.m., the interstellar object 3I 2025 U1, Atlas, entered its solar conjunction phase. The angular separation between Earth, the interstellar visitor, and the Sun dropped below the threshold required for reliable observation. Ground-based telescopes lost visual contact, and the object effectively vanished from our monitoring capabilities. This timing is also meticulously documented and calculable based on orbital mechanics and geometric principles. Both events are factual occurrences, both have been verified, and they transpired within approximately 48 hours of each other. A third element in this timeline merits mention. The latter part of October 2025 saw an increase in solar activity. Active sunspot regions were expanding, and space weather forecasters were monitoring the potential for solar flares and coronal mass ejections. This is a common occurrence during solar maximum, the 11-year peak in the Sun's activity cycle, and we are currently within or nearing that peak phase. The Sun has exhibited more than typical activity, releasing a greater volume of radiation and charged particles, thereby increasing the likelihood of disruptions to satellites and power grids. Therefore, we have three distinct phenomena unfolding within a compressed time frame: a significant failure in cloud computing infrastructure, an interstellar object entering an observational blackout, and heightened solar activity. Any single one of these events would be noteworthy. The concurrence of all three transforms what could be dismissed as random chance into a confluence that begins to resemble a deliberately orchestrated coincidence. Let us discuss what makes this particular timing significant, beyond mere calendar dates. The concept of blind spots is paramount in this context. In the digital domain, when AWS US East 1 experiences an outage, we lose visibility into the operations of vast segments of internet infrastructure. Services cease functioning, monitoring tools fail, and the very systems we rely on to understand network behavior become unreliable. It is not simply that things stop working. Our capacity to diagnose the reasons for their cessation is compromised. Engineers are forced to operate without full situational awareness, relying on incomplete information and attempting to resolve cascading failures without access to comprehensive diagnostic data. In the astronomical realm, when an object enters solar conjunction, we lose our direct observational capability. We cannot ascertain the object's current activities, whether it is fragmenting or behaving unexpectedly. We are compelled to wait until it reappears from behind the sun to resume our observations. We are confronted with two distinct forms of blindness, occurring simultaneously across two different domains. The analogy that repeatedly comes to mind is a power grid failing precisely as a lighthouse's shutters close. You navigate using the available infrastructure, relying on signals and markers to ascertain your location and the surrounding conditions. Suddenly, the electrical supply is cut, plunging you into darkness from artificial sources. Concurrently, the natural beacon that provides navigational reference closes its shutter, depriving you of that guidance as well. For a period, you are navigating in a state of dual darkness. It is possible that nothing significant occurs during this blackout. Perhaps you manage to navigate safely once the lights are restored. However, during the blackout itself, you have no means of knowing what you might have missed. You cannot confirm that everything proceeded without incident because you were unable to observe any progression whatsoever. This is the scenario we are currently examining. A period of dual blindness where both our technological monitoring and our cosmic observation capabilities were simultaneously incapacitated. Now allow me to be unequivocally clear on one point. Scientists, engineers, and cloud providers currently assert no physical connection between these occurrences. Amazon's explanation for the outage centers exclusively on internal technical failures. Astronomers studying 3I Atlas observe no mechanism by which the comet could impact Earth's technology from its remote position. The distance is too vast, the comet too small, and the energies involved too negligible to cause any direct physical disruption. There is no credible scientific model that would suggest an interstellar comet passing behind the Sun could somehow instigate cascading failures within cloud computing infrastructure. The fundamental physics does not support such a scenario, nor does the available data. The expert consensus is that these are unrelated events that coincidentally overlapped in time. This is the baseline rational perspective, and it is likely accurate. However, here is why this moment remains compelling. Notwithstanding that rational baseline, the simultaneous occurrence of a major infrastructure failure and a cosmic blind spot is exceptionally rare. Significant outages of this magnitude happen perhaps a few times annually across all major cloud providers. Interstellar objects entering our solar system and reaching solar conjunction occur even less frequently. To date, we have confirmed only 3 interstellar visitors in recorded human history, and we have observed only 2 of them during their conjunction periods. The probability of these infrequent events coinciding within a 48-hour window is genuinely low. It is not an impossibility, nor is it miraculous, but it is low enough to warrant careful examination. When multiple rare events converge, one can dismiss it as random chance or investigate whether underlying connections, not immediately apparent, might exist. The scientific method does not mandate belief in connections, but it does require their investigation. The statistical data regarding the visibility of 3I Atlas during conjunction is straightforward. When the solar elongation angle drops below 30 degrees, reliable observation becomes exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, with ground-based telescopes. The object remains within this observational void for a duration determined by its orbital velocity and trajectory. For 3I Atlas, this period was anticipated to last from late October through early November, potentially extending into mid-November, contingent upon observing conditions as the object emerged. This represents weeks of lost data, weeks during which we are unable to monitor the interstellar visitor's activities as it approaches perihelion and begins its outward journey. For an object that we have been tracking for only a few months, this constitutes a significant gap in our observational record. Previous cloud outages have occurred throughout the history of Internet infrastructure. They happen with some regularity because complex systems by their nature can fail in intricate ways. However, it is rare for a major outage to coincide with a cosmic blind zone event, primarily because cosmic blind zone events involving interstellar objects are themselves uncommon. This is the type of coincidence that gives one pause, even if the ultimate conclusion is that no causal link exists. It is akin to observing two pendulums that normally swing independently, suddenly synchronize for a few oscillations before resuming their asynchronous motion. One notices the moment of synchronization because it stands out against the usual pattern of independent movement. It might signify nothing, perhaps merely a statistical anomaly, or it might warrant an investigation into whether there are aspects of the system that are not fully understood, some subtle coupling mechanism that has been overlooked. There is also a psychological dimension that must be acknowledged. Humans possess an extraordinary capacity for pattern recognition, sometimes to an excessive degree. We perceive faces in clouds, discern messages in static, and connect events that have no meaningful relationship. This is a survival mechanism that has become hyperactive. A brain evolved to detect predators in shadows now identifies conspiracy and coincidence. The rational part of our minds is aware of this tendency and attempts to compensate, striving to avoid erroneous pattern recognition. However, this compensatory instinct can swing too far in the opposite direction, leading to the dismissal of potentially meaningful patterns out of fear of appearing foolish. The challenge lies in striking a balance, taking coincidences seriously enough to investigate them, but not so seriously that critical thinking is abandoned. What we are endeavoring to do here is walk that delicate balance, examining this overlap with a blend of curiosity and skepticism. Thus, we have established the timeline: infrastructure failure on October 20th, followed by the onset of the astronomical blind spot on October 21st. Elevated solar activity occurred within the same general time frame. We have also established the rarity of these events. Both individually are uncommon, and their overlap is exponentially uncommon. The expert consensus is also clear. No known physical mechanism connects these events causally. This leaves us with the fundamental question: given all of the above, why does this moment still feel significant? What is it about the concurrence of dual blind spots that engenders unease? What might we be missing when our cosmic senses go dark? These questions do not possess simple answers, which is precisely why they merit exploration. Now that we have set the stage and outlined the fundamental facts, let us delve deeper into the infrastructure aspect. What underlying vulnerabilities might link cloud failures to specific timing, coincidence, or something more deliberate? What does this outage reveal about the inherent fragility of the systems we have constructed? Part 5. Baseline debunkers and ground rules. Before we proceed further down this investigative path, it is imperative to establish certain ground rules and address the most apparent skeptical objections. The reality is that conjecture is not proof, and coincidence is not causation. The mere proximity of two events in time does not imply a relationship between them. Furthermore, the burden of proof for asserting such a connection is substantial. Therefore, let us present the strongest counter-arguments to any hypothesis suggesting a meaningful link between these events, and let us be forthright about the limitations of our current knowledge and what we can reasonably infer. The first counterpoint: cloud outages are not rare. Amazon Web Services has experienced numerous significant incidents within its US East 1 region over the years. A major outage occurred in December of 2021, which disrupted vast portions of the Internet for extended periods. Smaller incidents have taken place in 2023, 2024, and now in 2025. These are highly complex systems operating at immense scale, handling an unimaginable volume of traffic, and consequently, they are prone to failure. At times, the monitoring systems falter. Occasionally, automated recovery mechanisms fail. In other instances, cascading effects ripple through multiple interconnected subsystems, resulting in outages that may appear catastrophic from an external perspective but are ultimately explicable through mundane technical failures. There is nothing inherently unusual about a cloud provider experiencing an outage, even a significant one. It happens. It will continue to happen. To regard this specific outage as uniquely suspicious requires evidence that extends beyond mere temporal coincidence. The second counterpoint, 3I Atlas is not in close proximity to Earth and poses no physical threat. The object's perihelion, its closest approach to the Sun, maintains a distance well over 200 million kilometers from the Sun and an even greater distance from Earth. At no point in its trajectory does it come remotely near our planet. The energies associated with a comet at such a distance are insignificant from Earth's perspective. The object is small, likely measuring at most a few kilometers across, composed of ice, rock, and organic compounds. It is sublimating material as it heats up, forming a coma and a tail. However, this ejected material disperses into space over immense distances and carries no meaningful energy by the time it might theoretically reach Earth's vicinity. The notion that this comet could somehow impact our technology from such a distance defies fundamental principles of physics. The electromagnetic radiation is too weak, the gravitational effects are negligible, and particle radiation dissipates over distance. There exists simply no known mechanism by which 3I Atlas could directly cause problems for Earth-based infrastructure. The third counterpoint, there is no evidence of unusual solar or geomagnetic activity during the outage window. Space weather monitoring is extensive and continuous. Multiple satellites, ground-based magnetometers, and forecasting centers constantly observe the Sun for flares, coronal mass ejections, and other events that might impact Earth. During the period of the AWS outage, no major Earth-directed solar events were recorded. There were no X-class flares aimed at our planet, nor were there significant geomagnetic storms disrupting satellite operations or power grids. The solar activity that did occur was within normal parameters for conditions during solar maximum. Had the outage been attributable to space weather, we would possess clear evidence. Satellite operators would have reported issues, power grid operators would have observed fluctuations, and other internet services not reliant on AWS would have experienced problems. None of these effects were observed. The disruption was confined to AWS infrastructure, strongly suggesting an internal technical cause rather than an external cosmic one. These counterpoints are robust and warrant serious consideration. They represent the prevailing scientific and engineering consensus, a consensus built upon solid foundations of physics, statistics, and empirical observation. Any alternative explanation would necessitate overcoming these objections with compelling evidence. As of this moment, such evidence is not available. So, why are we engaging in this discussion at all? Because coincidence, while not definitive proof of causation, can serve as a catalyst for investigation. Because rare overlaps of unusual events deserve documentation, even if they ultimately prove to be inconsequential. Because the vulnerabilities exposed by this outage exist independently of any cosmic timing, and exploring those vulnerabilities is a worthwhile endeavor. And because the observational blind spot created by solar conjunction is a real and significant phenomenon, irrespective of its connection to terrestrial events. Let us establish the investigative framework that will guide us moving forward. We will commence with facts. Verify data points that are not subject to dispute. We will then explore deeper dimensions, examining technical details and contextual information that may not be immediately apparent. We will clearly label speculation when we enter that territory, distinguishing between what we know and what we might hypothetically consider. We will examine multiple scenarios and assess them against the available evidence. And we will maintain intellectual honesty regarding the questions that remain unanswered. This endeavor is not about persuading you of a particular explanation. It is about presenting the full spectrum of possibilities and empowering you to draw your own conclusions based on comprehensive information. We need to define certain terminology to ensure clarity and shared understanding. A blind spot in this context refers to a period or condition during which monitoring capability is lost or significantly diminished. Digital blind spots occur when infrastructure failures impair our ability to observe network behavior. Astronomical blind spots arise when geometric or environmental conditions prevent telescope observation. Conjunction specifically denotes an alignment where an object is positioned with the Sun from Earth's perspective, creating observational challenges. Cascading failure describes a situation where the failure of one system triggers subsequent failures in dependent systems, creating a chain reaction. An interstellar object, or ISO, is any celestial body that originated from outside our solar system, identified by its hyperbolic trajectory and velocity characteristics. The expectations for viewers throughout the remainder of this investigation should be clear. You will receive substantial technical detail concerning both cloud infrastructure and astronomical observation. You will be presented with clearly labeled speculation regarding alternative scenarios, some of which will be mundane and others exotic. You will receive an honest assessment of which scenarios are supported by evidence and which are purely hypothetical. What you will not receive is a dogmatic insistence on any single explanation. You will not encounter breathless conspiracy theorizing unsupported by facts. And you will not receive a neat resolution, as the narrative is still unfolding. And some questions genuinely lack definitive answers at this time. I wish to encourage an approach to this material that combines open-mindedness with healthy skepticism. Be willing to consider unusual possibilities, but demand evidence before accepting them. Recognize that complex events often have complex causes that are not immediately evident. Understand that experts can sometimes overlook connections because they operate within specific disciplinary silos, and that cross-domain patterns may only become apparent when multiple systems are examined simultaneously. Conversely, acknowledge that most coincidences are indeed just coincidences, and that extraordinary claims necessitate extraordinary evidence. The balance between these two positions is where genuinely interesting investigations take place. We are about to transition into the second act of this investigation, where we will delve deeper into technical specifics, explore lesser-known aspects of both the cloud failure and the interstellar visitor, and present multiple scenarios for how these events might or might not be interconnected. Some of what follows will challenge your assumptions about infrastructure resilience. Some will introduce you to surprising facets of astronomical observation. Some will venture into speculative territory that may evoke discomfort. And that is acceptable. The objective is not comfort, but understanding. The goal is to map out the entire range of possibilities, from the most commonplace to the most extraordinary, and then to ascertain which ones align with the evidence we possess. Let us examine the story of infrastructure vulnerability and pinpoint precisely what failed, how it failed, and why that failure pattern is more significant than one might imagine. This is Part 6, the saga of cloud infrastructure fragility. To grasp the magnitude of the outage on October 20th, one must first comprehend the inner workings of cloud infrastructure. Amazon Web Services US East 1 is not merely a single data center. It's a meticulously interconnected network of availability zones. These zones are distinct physical locations, each equipped with independent power, cooling, and networking capabilities, all consolidated within the Northern Virginia region. The foundational design principle is redundancy, meaning that if one availability zone experiences an issue, traffic is meant to seamlessly reroute to others, ensuring services remain accessible even during localized disruptions. This is the theoretical framework. The reality, as demonstrated on October 20th, proved considerably more intricate. The architecture of a modern cloud region is built upon numerous layers of abstraction. At the base lies the physical hardware: servers, storage devices, network switches, and routers. Above this, virtualization layers enable multiple virtual machines to operate on a single physical host. Further up, container orchestration systems manage vast numbers of application instances. Load balancers, positioned above these, distribute incoming traffic. Crowning it all are identity and authentication systems, DNS resolution services, monitoring and alerting tools, and databases that maintain configuration and state information. Each layer is dependent on the ones below it, and numerous services rely on shared infrastructure components that span across all layers. During the outage, AWS's status updates highlighted specific problem domains, difficulties with network connectivity, increased error rates within identity services, issues with DNS resolution, and problems affecting DynamoDB endpoints. Let's dissect what each of these entails. Network connectivity issues point to disruptions within the physical or virtual networks that facilitate communication between servers and with the broader internet. This could involve routing malfunctions, switch failures, or software glitches within network configuration management systems. Identity service errors signify that the systems responsible for verifying user identities, authenticating credentials, and authorizing access were either faltering or completely non-operational. Without functioning identity services, applications are incapable of validating users, granting permissions, or completing transactions requiring authentication. DNS resolution problems indicate a malfunction in the system that translates human-friendly domain names into machine-readable IP addresses. In essence, without DNS, computers cannot locate each other on the network, akin to having a telephone directory where all the numbers have been jumbled. DynamoDB endpoint issues mean that the database service, which a multitude of applications depend on for data storage and retrieval, was either inaccessible or returning error messages. Each of these problems in isolation would constitute a serious event. However, in combination, they triggered a catastrophic domino effect. Applications requiring user authentication encountered failures in identity services. Applications needing to locate resources struggled with DNS failures. Applications needing to access or modify data faced database failures. Since many applications are contingent on all three of these systems functioning correctly, their collective breakdown led to widespread operational collapse. The monitoring systems, which should have detected and reported these issues, were themselves reliant on the same failing infrastructure, thus hindering their ability to provide accurate information. Engineers were left to troubleshoot in the dark, operating with incomplete data and attempting to resolve cascading failures without a clear picture of the underlying problems. Historical context adds significant weight to this event. Amazon Web Services has experienced major service interruptions in the past, and each occurrence offers valuable lessons regarding system fragility. For instance, the December 2021 outage revealed vulnerabilities in the interaction between automated scaling systems and network devices. Services intended to fail over to backup regions were unable to do so because the control plane systems governing failover were themselves compromised. The recurring pattern observed is that while redundancy and fault tolerance are genuine and valuable attributes, they do not offer absolute guarantees. They remain effective until a confluence of failures overwhelms protective mechanisms or until cascading effects propagate faster than automated systems can react. The question arises, why does a failure in a single region have global repercussions? The Internet is not as globally distributed as we might perceive. While data centers are scattered worldwide and multiple traffic pathways exist, numerous critical services harbor dependencies that funnel through specific regions. Authentication systems might be centrally located in one area for consistency. Payment processing could be routed through particular endpoints. Content delivery networks may have their control planes situated in specific regions. API gateways used by third-party services for platform interaction might be region-specific. Consequently, when a particular region experiences an outage, services operating elsewhere can still be impacted, as they may be unable to complete essential operations that require communication with systems within the affected region. The analogy of a single overloaded tunnel is apt, but the situation is more dire. It's more akin to a tunnel that carries not only traffic, but also the traffic control signaling systems for an entire transportation network. When this tunnel fails, it's not just the vehicles within that are stranded. It's vehicles at intersections across the entire city, waiting for traffic lights that will never change because the control hub for the signaling system was housed within that failed tunnel. This illustrates the nature of cascading infrastructure failures. Their effects propagate through dependencies in ways that are not always readily apparent from architectural diagrams. Expert analyses, such as those published in The Guardian, have underscored that this outage highlights how Internet users are subject to the control of an excessively limited number of providers. This is not alarmist rhetoric, but an accurate reflection of market concentration. 3 major corporations dominate global cloud infrastructure. Any organization operating a business, a government service, or any form of digital platform is almost certainly utilizing services from Amazon, Microsoft, or Google, and likely from all 3. This concentration fosters efficiency and economies of scale, but also introduces systemic risk. When one of these providers encounters significant issues, vast segments of the Internet experience simultaneous disruptions. Reuters reported a specific technical detail worthy of emphasis. Problems with the health monitoring system of network load balancers. Load balancers are designed to distribute incoming traffic across numerous servers, preventing any single server from becoming overloaded. They continuously assess the health of the servers to which they direct traffic, rerouting requests away from servers that are experiencing failures or slowdowns. But what transpires when the health monitoring system itself malfunctions? The load balancer could continue sending traffic to inoperative servers, enter a state of panic and cease all traffic routing or make erroneous decisions based on flawed health data. Any of these scenarios results in user-facing service disruptions. When this occurs across hundreds or thousands of load balancers concurrently, the impact is catastrophic. The element of surprise is noteworthy here. Despite extensive engineering efforts, billions of dollars invested in reliability, and teams of exceptionally talented engineers designing fault-tolerant systems, a major outage still occurred, taking hours to resolve. This should serve as a humbling realization, prompting us to re-evaluate our assumptions about the resilience of critical infrastructure. If the world's most advanced cloud provider, boasting unparalleled resources and expertise, can still experience catastrophic failures, it begs the question about the overall fragility of the systems upon which we rely. Alternative architectural approaches exist that could mitigate these risks. Decentralized edge computing, which processes data closer to users rather than in centralized data centers, could lessen reliance on specific regions. Multi-cloud strategies, where organizations deliberately distribute their infrastructure across multiple providers, could reduce the impact of any single provider's failure. Federated identity systems, where authentication does not depend on centralized services, could prevent authentication failures from cascading. Open protocols that facilitate easier migration between providers could reduce vendor lock-in and enable the maintenance of truly redundant infrastructure across competing platforms. However, all these solutions come with associated costs: increased complexity, reduced efficiency, more challenging operational management, and the need for coordination across organizational and corporate boundaries that are difficult to achieve. The vulnerability aspect warrants serious consideration. Could such centralization be an attractive target for a malicious actor, whether state-sponsored or otherwise, seeking to inflict maximum disruption with minimal effort? Targeting a handful of critical cloud regions would be an obvious strategy. It negates the need to compromise millions of individual systems. One compromises a few pivotal infrastructures and allows cascading failures to do the rest of the work. While there is no public evidence suggesting malicious intent behind the October 20th outage, the vulnerability is undeniably present, regardless of whether it has been exploited. Security researchers have been raising concerns about this for years. Infrastructure concentration creates desirable targets, and while defenses are substantial, they are not impregnable. Data from Down Detector indicated tens of thousands of problem reports within the first hour of the outage, eventually escalating to hundreds of thousands as awareness spread. Thousand Eyes, a third-party network monitoring service, observed the failure from multiple global vantage points and confirmed that the issues originated within AWS infrastructure and radiated outward through dependent services. The data revealed packet loss, increased latency, and failed connections, all tracing back to the US East 1 region as the source. This external validation is crucial as it confirms that the problem was not merely a misunderstanding of local issues by users or misattribution of unrelated problems. It was a genuine, significant infrastructure failure stemming from a central source. Therefore, we have established the technical narrative. Critical systems within a vital cloud region experienced multiple concurrent failures. These failures cascaded through dependent services globally, and recovery took hours despite immense engineering efforts. The event exposed fundamental vulnerabilities in our approach to building internet infrastructure, particularly the risks associated with centralization and shared dependencies. This is the fundamental technical account, complete in itself without any cosmic implications. However, let us now explore an intriguing question. Could space play a role in terrestrial infrastructure failures? Could the solar environment, an interstellar visitor, or the timing of astronomical events have any bearing on the story we have just recounted? Let us find out. This is part 7, the solar and interstellar environment. Could Three-Eyed Atlas be relevant? The Sun is not a static celestial body. It is a turbulent sphere of plasma undergoing continuous nuclear fusion. possessing a magnetic field that twists, writhes, and occasionally ruptures, releasing immense energy in the form of solar flares and coronal mass ejections. We are currently at or approaching solar maximum, the peak of the 11-year solar activity cycle, which signifies an increase in sunspots, flares, and other energetic events capable of impacting Earth. During mid-October of 2025, solar observers noted active sunspot regions developing on the Sun's surface. These regions are characterized by particularly strong and complex magnetic fields, correlating with an increased likelihood of flares and other eruptive phenomena. The space weather environment was elevated, not to catastrophic levels, but more active than during solar minimum periods. When we discuss space weather's influence on Earth, we typically refer to a few specific mechanisms. Solar flares generate bursts of electromagnetic radiation across the entire spectrum, including X-rays and extreme ultraviolet light. These photons reach Earth in approximately 8 minutes and can affect the ionosphere, the upper layer of our atmosphere crucial for radio communications. Coronal mass ejections, or CMEs, are colossal clouds measuring billions of tons of magnetized plasma ejected into space by the Sun. When these strike Earth's magnetic field, usually 1 to 3 days after departing the Sun, they can trigger geomagnetic storms that impact satellites, power grids, and navigation systems. Energetic particles, predominantly protons, can be accelerated by solar events and strike satellites, potentially causing temporary malfunctions or permanent damage to electronic components. So could any of this have affected cloud infrastructure on October 20th? The most probable answer is no, not directly. However, let us logically examine the possibilities. Cloud infrastructure is predominantly terrestrial or operates from low-flying commercial aircraft, thus not reaching space. The servers housed within AWS data centers are shielded by Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field from most space weather impacts. Nevertheless, there are indirect pathways worth considering. Satellite communications link some data centers for backup connectivity or long-distance routing. GPS and timing systems depend on satellite signals, and numerous network systems utilize GPS for precise time synchronization. If space weather were severe enough to disrupt satellites, it could potentially affect infrastructure reliant on satellite services. However, the crucial point is this. There is no record of significant satellite disruptions during the October 20th outage window. Communication satellites were functioning normally, GPS was operational, and space weather indices measuring geomagnetic storm intensity did not indicate any major events affecting Earth. Now let us introduce Three-Eyed Atlas into this scenario. The interstellar comet was approaching the Sun but remained distant from Earth, over 2 astronomical units away at the time of the outage. At such a distance, any direct impact on Earth would be virtually non-existent. Comets do not emit significant amounts of electromagnetic radiation. They are frigid masses of ice and rock that reflect sunlight. Upon heating, volatile materials sublimate, forming the characteristic coma and tail. The material released by Three-Eyed Atlas dispersed into space in all directions. A minute fraction might eventually intersect Earth's orbit months or years later, but in quantities so minuscule they would be undetectable except by specialized instruments designed to detect interstellar dust grains. However, let us engage with a more intriguing question. Could the comet's interaction with the solar environment generate indirect effects that somehow prove significant? As a comet approaches the Sun, several phenomena occur. Solar radiation heats its surface, causing ice to sublimate. The pressure exerted by sunlight and the solar wind, a constant stream of charged particles emanating from the Sun, expels the sublimated material away from the Sun, forming the tail. For interstellar objects which may possess different compositions than comets within our solar system, this process might behave unexpectedly. Three-Eyed Atlas exhibited surprising quantities of carbon dioxide and nickel in spectroscopic observations, suggesting a chemical composition dissimilar to typical solar system comets. Could this unusual chemistry lead to atypical interactions with the solar environment? The prevailing scientific consensus on this matter is unequivocal. No credible mechanism exists by which Three-Eyed Atlas could directly influence Earth's infrastructure. The energy levels are insufficient, the distances are too vast, and the physics involved do not support such an interaction. Space weather monitoring during the outage period revealed no major Earth-directed events that could account for infrastructure failures. Had a significant solar flare or CME occurred at the opportune time and orientation to affect Earth, it would have been evident in satellite data, ground magnetometer readings, and ionospheric monitoring. The absence of such evidence strongly suggests that the outage was attributable to internal technical issues rather than external cosmic influences. Nevertheless, the environmental context is worth noting. Solar maximum implies elevated background levels of solar activity, an increase in energetic particles in near-Earth space, greater variability in ionospheric conditions, and more opportunities for unexpected interactions. In terms of space weather, the system was operating under heightened conditions, even if no specific extreme event coincided with the narrow time frame of the outage. It is analogous to the difference between driving on a clear day versus driving in fog. Even if an accident is averted, the increased risk is tangible and measurable. The space environment in late October was not quiescent. It was heightened, dynamic, and more variable than during periods of low solar activity. We must now address fringe speculation, clearly demarcating it as such, which circulates within certain online communities. Some individuals have posited that interstellar objects might carry electromagnetic anomalies, be composed of materials not yet understood, or even represent engineered artifacts from extraterrestrial civilizations capable of affecting our technology, either deliberately or inadvertently. These notions, while imaginative, lack any empirical support. Object I Bar U Uramura, for example, sparked extensive speculation due to its unusual tumbling motion and slight acceleration, with some respected scientists, such as Avi Loeb of Harvard, suggesting that artificial origins could not be entirely ruled out. This speculation was contentious within the scientific community and remains unverified. Object I Borisov resembled a typical comet and did not inspire similar theories. Three-eyed Atlas, thus far, appears to be a comet behaving largely as expected, sublimating to form a coma and tail with a chemical composition that, while unusual, is not impossible for an interstellar origin. The purpose of mentioning these fringe theories is not to endorse them, but to acknowledge their existence and explain why they are not accepted by mainstream science. The burden of proof for extraordinary claims is substantial. To assert that an object from interstellar space could be impacting our technology requires demonstrating a viable mechanism, presenting evidence of unusual properties, and conclusively ruling out more conventional explanations. None of these prerequisites have been met. The observed chemical composition differences in three-eyed Atlas are scientifically intriguing but suggest nothing beyond natural variations in comet formation under different stellar conditions. What we can definitively state is that the observational blind spot created by solar conjunction is a real and significant impediment to scientific progress. When three-eyed Atlas moved behind the Sun from Earth's perspective, ground-based telescopes lost sight of it, halting observations and data collection. For an object observable only for a limited duration before it permanently exits the inner solar system, this represents an irretrievable gap in our knowledge. We will never ascertain what three-eyed Atlas was doing during that period unless we possess other observing platforms, such as space telescopes or Mars orbiters, capable of viewing it from different angles. This constitutes a genuine loss for astronomy, irrespective of any connection to terrestrial events. The temporal coincidence persists. At nearly the same moment our digital infrastructure experienced catastrophic failure, our observational capacity for this rare interstellar visitor also ceased due to geometric alignment. Two distinct blind spots, each with its own cause, converging in time. The scientific consensus holds that this is a mere coincidence devoid of causation. The underlying physics supports this consensus. However, the timing creates a narrative structure that is undeniably compelling, even if ultimately without consequence. And that particular narrative structure warrants a closer look, if only to grasp why certain patterns resonate so strongly with us. We are now venturing into more hypothetical realms, outlining potential situations that span from the ordinary to the extraordinary, each clearly delineated by its likelihood. These are not pronouncements of what will happen, nor are they accusations. They serve as thought experiments for mapping possibilities, for comprehending the entire spectrum of what might logically explain the synchronized timing we have observed. Part 8 delves into speculative attacks, exploring potential vectors encompassing cyber, cosmic, or even clandestine operations. We are now officially entering uncharted speculative territory. Nothing presented in this section is definitively proven, nor even strongly supported by evidence. These are exercises in scenario construction, mental explorations, and frameworks for understanding how one might perceive the coincidental timing if they were actively seeking patterns or orchestrating events. Consider these as imaginative yet disciplined hypotheses, constrained by plausibility but not necessarily by existing evidence. We will scrutinize 3 prominent scenarios, examining what each would necessitate, what indicators we might anticipate observing, and what we have in fact witnessed. Scenario A proposes a cyber attack synchronized with the celestial object's obscured period. Envision yourself as a highly advanced cyber operative, possibly state-sponsored, possessing the capability to disrupt critical infrastructure. You are devising a plan that will inevitably draw attention and prompt investigation. Your objective is to achieve maximum impact while simultaneously maximizing ambiguity regarding attribution and causation. You become aware that an extraterrestrial object is scheduled to pass through solar conjunction, creating a brief astronomical blind spot during a specific period in late October. You decide to schedule your assault for this precise interval. The rationale? The celestial occurrence provides a diversion, an alternative narrative, a moment of dual obscurity that could mask your activities or, at the very least, generate sufficient background noise to impede a swift forensic examination. What would be required for this scenario to unfold? Firstly, a sophisticated knowledge of the 3I Atlas conjunction timing, which is readily available information derived from orbital calculations. Secondly, the capacity to induce failures within the infrastructure of major cloud service providers, a feat that is undeniably challenging but not beyond the realm of possibility for well-resourced entities. Thirdly, a motivation to time the attack for symbolic or operational advantages, rather than simply seizing the first available opportunity. Fourthly, a willingness to operate during a period that might paradoxically attract more attention due to the astronomical coincidence which could run counter to certain stealth objectives. What indicators would we expect to observe if this scenario were indeed unfolding? Evidence of unauthorized system access or unusual patterns within network logs. Compromise indicators suggesting a coordinated malicious campaign. Potentially multiple attack vectors simultaneously targeting interconnected systems. Forensic analysis that ultimately uncovers intrusion signatures, rather than merely attributing the events to innocent technical malfunctions. What have we actually observed? Amazon has not reported any evidence of a malicious cyber attack. Their public statements attribute the service interruption to technical failures within their monitoring and network systems. No governmental cybersecurity agencies have issued alerts concerning attacks on cloud infrastructure during this time frame. Independent security researchers have not published findings indicating a compromise. The observed patterns of the disruption appear to be consistent with cascading technical failures rather than deliberate, coordinated assaults. This does not definitively rule out the possibility of attacks, but it implies that if they did occur, they were executed with such sophistication as to perfectly mimic accidental failures. And thus far they have eluded detection. While conceivable, introducing such complexity without supporting evidence typically deviates from the most straightforward explanation. Scenario B posits that a cosmic event triggered a chain reaction. This scenario is the most scientifically improbable. So let us be unequivocally clear about its low likelihood from the outset. The theoretical progression would be as follows. 3I Atlas, an interstellar object possessing potentially unusual material properties, interacts with the solar environment in unforeseen ways. It might emit a surge of electromagnetic energy, or its interaction with solar plasma could generate secondary effects that propagate towards Earth. These effects would then somehow impact satellites or systems in the upper atmosphere, leading to a cascade down to terrestrial infrastructure. The timing of the service disruption and the solar conjunction would not be coincidental, as there would be an actual, albeit currently unknown, physical mechanism linking them. What would this scenario necessitate? A completely novel physical principle, or at least one we have not yet encountered, that permits an object of that distance and magnitude to influence Earth. Satellite disruptions would need to serve as intermediate conduits in this cascade, alongside space weather anomalies occurring during the outage window. This could manifest as impacts on ionospheric propagation or magnetospheric conditions that subsequently ripple into communication systems and, from there, into cloud computing infrastructure. What evidence would we anticipate seeing? Widespread satellite malfunctions, reports of issues from multiple satellite operators, space weather indices displaying unusual readings, and effects observable across a range of independent systems, not confined to a single cloud provider's infrastructure. Other nations and providers would likely experience similar disruptions if the cosmic cause were indeed affecting Earth on a broad scale. What have we actually witnessed? No satellite malfunctions were reported during the period of the outage. Space weather data indicated elevated but not extreme conditions. The observed effects were primarily confined to AWS infrastructure, with other providers functioning normally. There were no indications of ionospheric anomalies that might suggest external electromagnetic interference. This scenario falters on virtually every empirical requirement. It is imaginative, but the underlying physics and observable data do not support it. It is included here not due to its plausibility, but because some individuals may contemplate it. And it is therefore valuable to explicitly address why it is not a viable explanation. Scenario C suggests a human-orchestrated, opportunistic event, or the outage serving as a cover. This scenario is more nuanced. The outage is precisely as it appears: a routine, albeit significant, technical malfunction. However, individuals possessing prior knowledge of the impending failure, or those actively monitoring for opportunities, might have chosen that precise moment to conduct other activities under the veil of the ensuing chaos, such as exfiltrating data from systems while attention was focused on restoring services, or executing covert network reconfigurations while engineers were preoccupied. It could also have been a test of resilience or response capabilities. In this instance, the celestial timing would be purely coincidental, but the outage itself would create an operational window susceptible to exploitation. What would this scenario require? Either insider knowledge of the impending failure or a responsive, opportunistic approach to an observed disruption. The capability to execute operations that benefit from reduced surveillance or distracted defensive measures. A willingness to act amidst chaos, which inherently presents both opportunities and risks. What evidence would we expect to find? Potentially anomalous activity within forensic logs that occurred during the outage but was not directly related to its resolution. Subtle indicators of secondary compromises or data movements. Effects that might only become apparent at a later stage, following a comprehensive forensic review. This scenario is more challenging to confirm or refute, as its signature would be deliberately masked by the legitimate disruption caused by the outage response. What have we actually observed? No public reports of secondary incidents have emerged, nor are there any indicators suggesting that the outage was exploited as a cover for other operations. However, given the nature of this scenario, it is conceivable that we would not see public evidence even if it had occurred, as organizations rarely publicize successful intrusions and investigations can extend over several months. This scenario remains within the realm of the unproven but not immediately disprovable, rendering it more intellectually honest than scenario B, yet still speculative. For each of these scenarios, we can identify analogous real-world situations that help to illustrate the concepts, even if they do not definitively prove anything in this specific instance. History provides instances of cyber operations coinciding with physical disruptions or disasters, creating opportune windows. History also offers examples of solar storms that have incapacitated satellites and even power grids, demonstrating that space weather can indeed impact terrestrial infrastructure under certain conditions. Furthermore, history records cases where periods of low activity or blind spots in monitoring have been exploited by adversaries who understood these surveillance vulnerabilities. While none of these parallels definitively confirm that similar activities took place in October of the year 2025, they establish that the general patterns we are discussing are not purely fictional. The question of how an adversary might capitalize on dual blind spots is indeed worthy of consideration as a thought experiment. If one could orchestrate or anticipate a moment when both digital surveillance and astronomical observation were simultaneously impaired, what advantages might that confer? It could lead to a diminished capacity to correlate events across different domains, an increase in noise and confusion during investigative processes, and a symbolic or psychological impact extending beyond the practical consequences. It could also serve as a test of whether systems designed for resilience actually perform as intended when subjected to multiple stresses. These are not necessarily advantages that would outweigh the inherent risk of operating under heightened scrutiny, but they are quantifiable considerations for strategic planning. The critical caveat bears repetition. Public statements from Amazon Web Services characterize the events as technical failures. NASA and space weather agencies report no physical connection between 3I Atlas and terrestrial systems. The prevailing consensus within the scientific and engineering communities is that these are unrelated occurrences. The scenarios we have outlined are speculative exercises, not accusations or predictions. They represent methods of contemplating the landscape of possibilities, of visualizing what the entire spectrum of potential explanations looks like when all plausible, even improbable avenues are mapped. In most instances, when undertaking this kind of analytical exercise, one ultimately returns to the initial conclusion, with the simplest explanation proving to be the correct one. However, on rare occasions, the exercise may reveal something unexpected that had remained hidden in a domain that had not been examined. That is the purpose of this endeavor, not to promote conspiratorial thinking, but to ensure that the entire picture has been thoroughly examined before declaring it understood. Moving forward, we will scrutinize the astronomical observational vulnerability in greater detail, focusing on what transpires when our celestial vantage points lose sight of an object, and why that observational gap is significant, irrespective of any connection to terrestrial events. Part 9 examines the observational blind spot and astronomy's inherent vulnerability. When a celestial body passes behind the Sun from Earth's perspective, our ability to observe it is rendered impossible. This is not a technological limitation that can be overcome with more advanced telescopes or clearer atmospheric conditions. It is a fundamental consequence of geometry. The Sun's brilliance is so overwhelming that any object within approximately 30 degrees of it in the sky becomes effectively invisible to optical telescopes on the ground. While solar astronomers employ specialized instruments, such as coronagraphs that obscure the solar disk, these are designed for specific observational goals and are generally not suitable for tracking small, rapidly moving objects like comets. For 3I Atlas, solar conjunction signified an observational blackout lasting several weeks, a period during which the object would traverse its perihelion, experience maximum solar heating, and potentially undergo fragmentation or behavioral changes, all without our capacity to witness these events. Let us be precise regarding the case of 3I Atlas. The object was anticipated to reach perihelion on or around October 29, 2025, at a distance of 1.36 astronomical units from the Sun, marking its closest approach, the point of greatest heating and activity. However, from Earth's vantage point, the object would have already been obscured by the Sun, lost in solar glare by October 21st. Consequently, we would miss observing the most dynamic and scientifically compelling phase of its passage. Astronomers had been tracking 3I Atlas since its discovery in July, collecting data on its orbit, composition, rotation, and activity levels. Then, just as events were becoming particularly interesting, observation ceased. Telescope time was reallocated to other targets, and the data stream ended. Who monitors an object when it disappears behind the Sun? Ground-based telescopes are incapable due to the aforementioned reasons. Space-based telescopes like Hubble or James Webb can occasionally observe celestial bodies closer to the Sun than terrestrial instruments, but they are subject to strict pointing limitations to prevent accidental solar observation that could damage their sensitive equipment. These telescopes are generally unable to track objects through solar conjunction. While certain specialized space-based solar observatories or heliospheric missions might capture fleeting glimpses of bright comets in proximity to the Sun, 3I Atlas lacks the luminosity to be readily detected by these instruments, which are optimized for different observational targets. What about spacecraft located elsewhere, such as Mars orbiters or rovers? In principle, yes. An observer on Mars or an orbiter in Martian orbit would view 3I Atlas from a different angle and might maintain visibility during Earth's conjunction period. However, Mars-based assets are limited in number, Their observation time is highly valued and meticulously allocated, and coordinating observations of a specific comet from Mars necessitates planning and prioritization that may not have been undertaken. The practical outcome is a surveillance gap, a period of time during which this rare interstellar visitor was effectively unobserved by humanity. Could something transpire during that interval that we would miss? Absolutely. The comet could fragment, breaking into multiple pieces as thermal stress exceeds its structural integrity. It could experience an outburst, characterized by a sudden release of gas and dust, leading to a temporary increase in brightness. Its rotational period could change if outgassing produces asymmetrical jets that impart torque on the nucleus. Its chemical composition might vary as subsurface layers are exposed through sublimation. Any of these events would be scientifically significant to observe, and all could occur during the period when we are unable to see. This is frustrating for astronomers, but not inherently alarming. It is simply a limitation imposed by geometry that we manage as best we can. Now let us connect this to the broader narrative. Concurrently with the major failure of our digital infrastructure, our capacity for astronomical observation of this object also ceased. Two distinct blind spots arising from two different mechanisms converged into a single temporal coincidence. The astronomical blind spot does not directly create an opportunity for malicious activity. 3I Atlas is not considered a surveillance target for national security purposes, and no covert operations are being conducted on or around an interstellar comet. However, the metaphorical parallel is striking. Both our digital sensors and our cosmic senses were simultaneously rendered inoperative. This creates a poetic symmetry, if nothing else, a moment when humanity's awareness of both its technological networks and its celestial visitors was temporarily diminished. Historical precedents exist of operations or events that have exploited solar glare or blind zones, though most are considerably more prosaic than cosmic conspiracies. Satellite surveillance experiences periods of obscured visibility when targets pass behind Earth's horizon or when solar angles impede thermal imaging. Space agencies must meticulously plan missions around conjunction periods when communication with spacecraft is difficult or impossible due to their position on the opposite side of the Sun from Earth. Mars missions, for example, experience regular conjunction periods approximately every 26 months when Mars passes behind the Sun. During these weeks, command operations are suspended, and spacecraft function autonomously, as radio signals would have to traverse too close to the Sun, where solar interference would corrupt them. These are standard operational constraints that are managed through careful planning and patience. In the realm of space surveillance and tracking, blind zones are well understood phenomena. Ground-based radar and optical telescopes have coverage gaps determined by geographical location and object trajectories. Space-based sensors mitigate some of these gaps but possess their own limitations. The perpetual question for any surveillance system is, what are we failing to observe when we cannot see? During the solar conjunction of 3I Atlas, we are missing whatever that object is doing. If it behaves normally, we will reacquire it upon its emergence and resume observations. If it undergoes an unexpected change, we might observe the consequences upon regaining a visual contact, or we might not, depending on the nature of the alteration. The uncertainty is an intrinsic characteristic of the observational gap. Experts in space policy and astronomy have discussed the challenge of coverage gaps for decades. Ideally, we would possess observing platforms strategically distributed throughout the solar system, offering multiple vantage points, thereby ensuring that no object could be simultaneously obscured by the Sun from all observers. In practical terms, this is an expensive undertaking requiring sustained investment in deep space infrastructure, which has not been prioritized. We make do with the resources available: ground-based telescopes, a limited number of space telescopes, and occasional fortuitous geometric alignments where Mars or other planets can provide alternative perspectives. For most applications, this level of coverage is adequate, but for rare occurrences, such as interstellar object passages, it inevitably leads to gaps in our observational record. The cautionary note here is crucial, even in the presence of a gap, an inability to observe during a specific period. It does not automatically imply that something malicious or even unusual occurred during that interval. In most cases, the most straightforward explanation prevails. The object continued its trajectory, adhering to predictable orbital mechanics and physical processes. The absence of observation is not evidence of anomalous behavior. It is simply an absence of data. We endeavor to bridge that gap by employing interpolation and models that predict probable occurrences based on pre- and post-gap observations, coupled with our understanding of cometary behavior. While these predictions are generally reliable, they are not a perfect substitute for direct observation. Returning to the digital blind spot, both instances involve a temporary loss of monitoring capability, yet the underlying mechanisms and their implications are fundamentally distinct. The cloud service disruption represented a failure within systems that we ourselves designed and maintain, a breakdown in infrastructure that ought to have been more robust. The astronomical conjunction, conversely, is a product of natural geometry that we cannot alter. It is a limitation we must accommodate rather than rectify. The former suggests vulnerabilities in our technological design and operational practices. The latter emphasizes the need for humility regarding our observational reach and acknowledges the existence of inherent gaps. Both serve as reminders that comprehensive awareness, whether of our digital networks or our cosmic surroundings, is more challenging than it appears and more precarious than we would prefer. We will now consolidate all the elements discussed thus far, the timing, the mechanisms, the potential motivations, to construct a framework for evaluating the plausibility of various scenarios. Part 10 presents a synthesis, the narrative matrix. We have covered extensive ground, encompassing the technical intricacies of a significant cloud infrastructure failure, the astronomical details of an interstellar visitor entering solar conjunction, the temporal coincidence that brought both events within the same narrow window, and speculative scenarios ranging from cyber intrusions to cosmic interventions. Now let us organize this information into a framework that clarifies the interrelationships. Consider this as a decision matrix, a method for weighing different explanations against three critical criteria: timing, means, and motive. Timing addresses how effectively an explanation accounts for the observed temporal coincidence. If events are truly unrelated, we would expect their timing to be random, with occasional overlaps occurring purely by chance. If there is a connection, we would anticipate a tight temporal correlation that is statistically improbable to arise randomly. Means pertains to the mechanism required for an explanation to be valid, and whether we possess evidence of its existence. Can we identify physical, technical, or operational pathways that would establish a causal link between the events? Motive investigates who benefits or what objective is served by these events occurring in conjunction. For deliberate actions, motive helps us determine whether an explanation is strategically coherent. Let's consider various scenarios and assess each based on these criteria. Scenario 1. Pure chance. Disconnected events. Timing. We're observing two infrequent occurrences within a 48-hour span. Solar conjunctions with comets happen periodically, yet comets originating from beyond our solar system are exceptionally uncommon. Significant cloud service disruptions happen a few times annually. The concurrence is improbable, though not entirely outside the realm of possibility given the sheer volume of global activity. This implies no underlying connection is necessary, as they are independent. The network disruption stems from technical issues within the cloud provider's infrastructure. The celestial alignment is due to orbital mechanics. Neither event influences the other. Motive is irrelevant as there's no intentional coordination. Strengths. This explanation is economical. It doesn't rely on unknown scientific principles or clandestine plots. It aligns with the available data. Weaknesses. It fails to satisfy our innate human desire for causality and leaves the coincidental timing feeling suspect, even if statistically justifiable. Scenario 2. A breakdown in systems unrelated to celestial phenomena, but with notable timing. This is essentially Scenario 1, but it acknowledges that the timing, while coincidental, is significant enough to warrant documentation and examination. Timing. Identical to Scenario 1. Explanation. Identical to Scenario 1. Motive. Not applicable. Strengths. Encompasses all advantages of Scenario 1 plus an explicit recognition that rare coincidences are worth investigating, even if they ultimately prove inconsequential. Weaknesses. Identical to Scenario 1. This scenario likely represents the most intellectually honest stance given the current evidence. The events are independent, but the temporal proximity warrants careful scrutiny. Scenario 3. A covert digital operation timed to coincide with an astronomical event. Timing. Perfect synchronization would be expected if deliberately orchestrated. Explanation. Requires the capacity to breach cloud infrastructure and awareness of the conjunction's timing. Both are plausible individually, but their combination suggests a sophisticated entity with interdisciplinary knowledge. Motive. Creating a diversion, testing reactions, symbolic communication, or gaining an operational advantage through dual distraction. These are valid considerations, but arguably insufficient to offset the risks of operating under intense scrutiny. Strengths. Accounts for the precise timing as intentional rather than accidental. Weaknesses. Lacks any evidence of a cyber attack. It necessitates attributing complex planning without substantiation. It introduces unnecessary complexity. Scenario 4. Celestial phenomena directly causing the network outage. Timing. Would be perfectly elucidated by a physical cause and effect relationship. Explanation. Implies the existence of unknown or unanticipated physics that allows a distant comet to impact terrestrial infrastructure, potentially via satellite or ionospheric intermediaries to transmit effects to ground systems. Motive. Not applicable if it's a natural occurrence. Strengths. Would definitively explain the timing if such a mechanism were established. Weaknesses. No known mechanism exists. No evidence of anomalous space weather. The effects are too localized to a single provider. It contradicts established physics. This scenario fails entirely on the means criterion. Scenario 5. A standard network disruption being opportunistically leveraged during the conjunction. Timing. Coincidental timing of the outage, but the exploitation could be reactive rather than premeditated. Explanation. Requires only the ability to act amidst chaos, which many actors might possess. Motive. Data theft, establishing network presence, or testing resilience under the guise of a legitimate crisis. Strengths. More credible than a pre-planned attack due to the absence of obvious attack indicators. Weaknesses, still speculative. No evidence of secondary incidents. Difficult to differentiate from legitimate recovery operations. Examining this framework narratively, the coincidence explanation emerges as the clear frontrunner in terms of aligning with the available evidence. It necessitates the fewest assumptions, corresponds to our observations, and avoids invoking unexplained physics or unproven conspiracies. The network disruption had technical roots that Amazon has identified and is presumably addressing to avert future occurrences. The celestial alignment was a consequence of orbital dynamics, predicted by astronomers months in advance. The proximity in time is simply a case of random events occasionally occurring in clusters. While this may not be an emotionally satisfying narrative, as humans inherently seek meaning and connection, it is the explanation that adheres most closely to Occam's razor. The most straightforward explanation that accounts for the observed phenomena is typically the correct one. Part 11. The recent discovery of a high-energy neutrino cosmic event. On September 19, 2025, deep beneath the Antarctic ice, something extraordinary arrived. The IceCube Neutrino Observatory, a cubic kilometer of frozen water equipped with thousands of optical sensors, registered a neutrino event designated IceCube 2255F0919A. This was no ordinary particle. It was a messenger that had traversed the entirety of Earth without interacting with a single atom. A phantom that passed through our planet as if it were not there. Its energy signature registered at approximately 290 tera-electron volts. For perspective, that's roughly 20,000 times more energetic than anything the Large Hadron Collider can produce. And it originated from somewhere beyond our solar system, far beyond the familiar confines of our galaxy. It's crucial to understand what makes neutrinos so profoundly enigmatic. These particles act as the universe's ultimate clandestine operatives. They interact with matter so rarely that trillions stream through your body every second, completely unnoticed. They are born in the most cataclysmic cosmic phenomena. Supernovae, black holes devouring stars, processes so energetic they make our sun appear as a mere flicker in a tempest. Detecting one, I mean truly isolating one from the countless billions that sweep past us, is akin to finding a single, specific grain of sand on every beach on Earth. It should be impossible, yet it occurred. The detection happened 12 hours after the event itself. That's the nature of neutrino astronomy. We are consistently playing catch-up. The particle arrived, triggered the sensors, and only then did the automated alert systems awaken the astronomers. By the time human eyes examined the data, whatever had generated that neutrino had already concluded its cosmic fury billions of light years away. We were effectively blind. Then we looked outward and realized something had been intensely signaling to us in a language we are only just beginning to decipher. Here's where it becomes truly compelling. The IceCube team promptly dispatched alerts to optical telescopes, radio arrays, and gamma-ray observatories worldwide. Their objective was to capture the lingering afterglow, the electromagnetic echo of whatever cataclysm spawned this particle. However, herein lies the challenge. The directional precision for neutrino detections is measured in square degrees. Imagine being told a fire is somewhere within your city, but with no indication of the specific neighborhood. Telescopes frantically scanned the designated region, a patch of sky within the constellation Ursa Major, but nothing immediately apparent emerged. No supernova, no gamma-ray burst, no flaring blazar, only the neutrino itself, a solitary emissary from an event we remain unable to directly observe. Contemplate the implications. Something out there possessing the power to accelerate particles to energies that dwarf anything we can artificially generate. Something capable of penetrating intergalactic space and delivering its payload directly through our planet has occurred. And we nearly missed it entirely. Had those sensors not been in place, buried under a mile of Antarctic ice, had the detection algorithms not been honed over decades of diligent effort, that event would have remained utterly invisible to us. It would have transpired regardless. The universe is indifferent to whether we are observing. This scenario mirrors the network outage that caught us off guard. One moment everything operates normally, the next you realize a monumental event has transpired without any prior warning. The cosmos operates on a similar principle. Phenomena unfold continuously at scales and across wavelengths that we simply cannot perceive without specialized instrumentation. Neutrinos are impervious to optical telescopes. They are unimpressed by magnetic fields. They disregard the very fabric of ordinary matter. To detect them, one must deploy instruments in the most unconventional locations, deep within oceans, buried in mountains, or frozen within Antarctic ice. It requires transforming the Earth itself into a detector and patiently waiting. The implications of IceCube 2550919A are still being unraveled. Scientists are cross-referencing the timing and direction with data from other instruments. Was there a coinciding gravitational wave signal? Did any X-ray satellites register an anomaly? Could this have originated from a tidal disruption event, where a star strayed too close to a black hole and was torn apart? Or perhaps it was something even more extraordinary. Some theories propose that these ultra-high-energy neutrinos might originate from acceleration zones near supermassive black holes, from jets of plasma traveling at 99% of the speed of light. However, we are still in the realm of speculation. The universe has sent us a cryptic message, and we are endeavoring to decipher its origin from a cosmic catastrophe. Here lies the speculative aspect that warrants serious consideration. How many such events are we currently overlooking? IceCube is sensitive, but it is not all-knowing. It has blind spots in its observational coverage. There are energy ranges it struggles to detect, and directions it cannot effectively monitor. For every neutrino we register, thousands more pass through undetected. And neutrinos represent just one category of cosmic messengers. Ultra-high-energy cosmic rays bombard our atmosphere constantly. Particles possessing energies that theoretically should not exist based on our current understanding. Yet we detect perhaps a handful annually across all our detector arrays combined. Gamma-ray bursts flare and dissipate within seconds. If our satellites are not precisely aimed, we miss them entirely. We exist beneath a sky that is perpetually emitting signals in frequencies we cannot hear, composed of particles we cannot see, conveying information about events we can scarcely comprehend. Our cosmic situational awareness is improving, yet it remains rudimentary. We are akin to someone attempting to grasp a symphony while wearing earplugs and a blindfold, occasionally catching a single note and trying to reconstruct the entire orchestra from that isolated sound. The universe is not obliged to manifest its phenomena in ways convenient for our detection methods. Just as the network outage blindsided us, the cosmos continually catches us unaware. The disparity lies in the scale. When your internet service fails, you notice immediately due to your reliance on it. When a supermassive black hole on the far side of the universe expels a particle that passes through your body, you remain entirely unaware unless a billion-dollar detector has been constructed in Antarctica. Both events share the same fundamental characteristic, though they occur within blind spots. They expose vulnerabilities in our infrastructure. They serve as a stark reminder that our perception is perpetually incomplete, always delayed, and perpetually reconstructed from fragments. And here lies the question that should give you pause. If we are constantly missing cosmic events, events that could theoretically impact us if they occurred in close proximity, what else are we failing to detect? What other silent occurrences are unfolding within our digital or cosmic blind spots, awaiting the moment when the appropriate instrument is finally directed towards them at the correct time? Now let us return our focus to terrestrial infrastructure, for our digital world is equally precarious. Part 12. Dark cloud, a major telecommunications backbone outage in Europe. On March 7, 2025, at approximately 4:30 a.m. Central European Time, something fractured. Not a minor issue, not a localized glitch or a neighborhood cable malfunction. The entire southern telecommunications backbone traversing the Mediterranean experienced what engineers euphemistically term a catastrophic failure event. 3 critical submarine fiber optic cables responsible for transmitting data between Italy, Greece, and the Middle East went completely dark. The affected cables were the AAE-1, the Taiwi-5, and the Italy-Greece-1 corridor. Collectively, they carried approximately 40% of the internet traffic flowing between Europe and Asia. And just like that, their functionality ceased. The repercussions were immediate and far-reaching. Internet service providers throughout southern Europe observed a drastic reduction in their traffic capacity, ranging from 60 to 70%. Cloud services hosted in regional data centers became inaccessible from certain networks. Video calls abruptly froze mid-conversation. Financial transactions timed out. Streaming services buffered indefinitely. This was not a gradual decline, it was an abrupt cessation. The digital equivalent of 3 major arteries vanishing simultaneously. Redundancy measures are designed to prevent precisely such occurrences. Traffic is intended to reroute automatically. However, when 3 cables are incapacitated concurrently, redundancy offers minimal assistance. It merely ensures that the remaining infrastructure is instantly overwhelmed. The official explanation arrived hours later, citing a confluence of seismic activity near Crete and potential anchor dragging from commercial shipping in international waters. 2 distinct incidents occurring almost simultaneously, impacting 3 separate cable systems. The statistical probability of such an event occurring by pure chance is astronomically low, though not impossible. Repairs were projected to take weeks, as these cables are situated on the ocean floor at depths reaching up to 3,000 meters. A simple dive with a roll of tape is not feasible. Specialized cable-laying vessels, remotely operated vehicles, and favorable weather conditions are required. In the interim, traffic was rerouted through northern corridors, introducing additional latency and congestion to an already strained system. This incident carries greater significance than might initially appear. The infrastructure underpinning telecommunications backbones serves as the foundational layer upon which all other digital services are built. Your cloud services, your streaming platforms, your financial networks, all are dependent on physical cables transmitting light pulses through glass fibers thinner than a human hair. These cables traverse oceans, connect continents, and constitute the very nervous system of the internet. When people refer to the cloud, they often envision something ethereal and distributed. The reality, however, involves copper and glass laid upon the ocean floor, susceptible to earthquakes, ships, and even the occasional curious shark. Yes, sharks are a documented concern. The AWS outage previously discussed was a failure within cloud infrastructure itself. This event was different. It was the underlying conduits rupturing. Consider it analogous to a major highway being completely blocked. Not just a single lane, but the entire roadway, along with the two primary alternate routes drivers would typically utilize to circumvent congestion. Vehicles would immediately accumulate, and detours would descend into chaos due to their insufficient capacity to handle the diverted volume. The bottleneck would propagate backward through the system, impacting cities and towns far removed from the actual obstruction. This is precisely what transpired here. Services in Paris and Berlin began experiencing issues because their traffic destined for Middle Eastern and Asian endpoints was abruptly forced onto entirely different pathways. Pathways that were already operating near their maximum capacity. Experts have been sounding the alarm about this for years. The internet may appear distributed, but it is, in fact, highly centralized. The majority of intercontinental traffic flows through a relatively limited number of high-capacity cables. These cables predominantly terminate at a small number of locations, often concentrated in areas offering specific geographical advantages. The Mediterranean region represents a critical choke point. Similarly, the Suez Canal corridor serves as a bottleneck for Middle Eastern traffic, and the English Channel for European to North American transit. These choke points create a concentration of risk. If one were to aim at disrupting global internet traffic, the objective would not be to sever thousands of cables, but rather to sever perhaps a dozen in strategically chosen locations. Dr. Nicole Strosielski, a researcher specializing in undersea cable infrastructure, has highlighted that we have constructed a global network possessing the same vulnerability profile as the telegraph networks of the 19th century. Concentrated landing points, shared routes, physical infrastructure exposed to environmental hazards, and the potential for deliberate interference. The critical difference lies in the scale. When a telegraph cable failed in 1900, a few messages experienced delays. When a modern fiber optic cable fails today, millions of individuals lose connectivity simultaneously, and billions of dollars in economic activity are brought to a standstill. Connecting this back to the AWS outage, a pattern begins to emerge. Our digital infrastructure, whether it pertains to cloud computing or the physical network cables, operates under the assumption that most components will function correctly most of the time. We implement redundancy, but this redundancy is often superficial. 2 cables instead of 1, 2 data centers instead of 1, 2 routing paths instead of 1. However, nobody implements tenfold redundancy, as it would be economically prohibitive. Consequently, we accept a degree of inherent fragility, hoping that catastrophic failures will remain infrequent and uncorrelated. But what if they are correlated? What if a disruption in one backbone system coincidentally aligns with another event? Perhaps another cloud outage, a solar storm affecting satellites, or a power grid issue in a major data center region. Individually, these events are manageable. The system adapts, traffic reroutes, services degrade, but largely persist. However, if 2 or 3 such events occur concurrently, cascade failures ensue. This leads to situations where the backup system is already under strain, and then the primary system fails, leaving traffic with nowhere to go. This represents an infrastructure-level blind spot event. We are aware of these cables' existence. We recognize their vulnerability. We monitor them continuously. Yet we cannot prevent seismic activity. We cannot control every vessel that anchors in international waters. We cannot circumvent the fundamental physics of having thousands of kilometers of cable resting on the ocean floor. Therefore, we wait, we hope, and we react when something breaks. Much like we await neutrino detections or post-mortem analyses of cloud outages, our approach is consistently reactive, always post-incident, and perpetually attempting to reconstruct events from incomplete information. The repairs to those Mediterranean cables took 3 weeks. Throughout that period, internet traffic across southern Europe operated at diminished capacity. Most users likely experienced little more than an occasional sluggishness. However, backbone operators noticed, financial systems noticed, and cloud providers noticed because their interregional data replication suddenly became significantly more costly and protracted. And somewhere in boardrooms and government offices, uncomfortable questions began to arise regarding the potential consequences if such an event were to recur, or if it were to happen in a more critical location, or if next time it was not an accident. And what of space weather? What narrowly missed impacting us this year? Part 13. Solar storm near miss and satellite risk. On May 10, 2025, the Sun emitted a significant expulsion. This is a simplified description, but it accurately conveys the event. A massive coronal mass ejection erupted from active region 3691, a sunspot cluster roughly twice the diameter of Earth. This was not merely solar wind, it was a cohesive bubble of plasma and magnetic field containing approximately 10 billion tons of matter ejected into space at speeds exceeding 2 million kilometers per hour. The projected trajectory indicated Earth as the destination. The anticipated arrival was May 13th. The predicted intensity was an X 9.8 on the solar flare scale, with an associated geomagnetic storm potential of G5, the highest rating. In essence, this event possessed the potential to be the most powerful solar storm to strike Earth since the Carrington event of 1859. It is essential to comprehend the implications of such an occurrence. The Carrington event caused telegraph wires to melt. It generated auroras visible in the Caribbean. It induced currents in electrical systems that were in their nascent stages of development, as electrical systems were exceedingly primitive at the time. If an event of that magnitude were to strike us today in 2025, with our vast constellations of satellites, our intricate power grids, and our pervasive reliance on GPS for virtually everything, the estimated damages would commence in the trillions of dollars. We're witnessing satellites spiraling out of control, power transformers failing spectacularly, and GPS signals becoming unreliable for extended periods, sometimes lasting days or even weeks. Radio communications are also experiencing severe disruptions. In essence, any infrastructure reliant on a stable magnetic field or dependable electromagnetic communication was potentially in jeopardy. An immediate alert was issued by the Space Weather Prediction Center. Satellite operators initiated procedures to reorient their spacecraft, minimizing their exposed surface areas. Grid managers prepared to isolate segments of the power network to avert cascading failures. Airlines rerouted flights over polar regions due to the anticipated surge in radiation exposure at higher latitudes. This wasn't an act of panic. It was standard operating procedure. These established protocols exist because we faced near misses in the past. We are acutely aware of the potential impact of solar storms. The crucial question was whether this particular event would strike directly or merely brush past us. On May 12th, something entirely unforeseen occurred. The coronal mass ejection, CME, encountered another, smaller ejection that had been released 36 hours prior. These two plasma clouds merged, and in the process, their magnetic fields partially neutralized each other. The resulting combined structure underwent a slight rotation, just a few degrees, but crucially, this shift moved Earth from a direct impact trajectory to a glancing blow scenario. When the storm finally reached us on May 13th, it was indeed powerful, but not to a catastrophic degree. Geomagnetic storm levels peaked at a G4 rating, rather than the maximum G5. Auroras were visible as far south as northern Spain. A handful of satellites in low Earth orbit experienced transient issues. GPS accuracy was diminished by several meters for approximately 6 hours, but the power grids remained operational. The principal satellite constellations continued to function without significant interruption. By May 15th, space weather conditions had returned to their normal parameters. We had narrowly avoided disaster. This wasn't due to our preparations or ingenious engineering, but purely by fortunate chance. The orientation of that magnetic field and the precise timing of the earlier ejection were random variables beyond our influence. Had the geometry been even slightly different, had the CME erupted 8 hours earlier or later, Earth might have found itself directly in the path of a G5 storm, unleashing its full potential for chaos. Our present-day civilization is almost entirely dependent on space-based systems. GPS technology does more than just guide vehicles. It synchronizes financial transactions, orchestrates power grid switching, facilitates precision agriculture, and manages seamless transitions in cellular networks. Satellites provide vital weather data, act as communication relays, deliver internet access to remote regions, and monitor a vast array of phenomena, from deforestation to missile launches. When people speak of space as the new frontier, they often miss a critical point. Space has already been extensively colonized by our essential infrastructure. We have effectively extended our global nervous system into orbit, and in doing so we have become vulnerable to events unfolding 93 million miles away on the surface of our Sun. Solar storms adhere to an approximately 11-year cycle. We are currently approaching solar maximum, the apex of cycle 25, which is projected to occur around late 2025 or early 2026. This signifies an increase in sunspot activity, more frequent solar flares, and a greater number of coronal mass ejections. The occurrence of severe solar events escalates dramatically during solar maximum. We can anticipate several more close calls within the upcoming 12 to 18 months. Some of these will pass us by, while others may impact us directly. The critical question is whether one of these events will possess sufficient intensity and the correct orientation to inflict substantial damage. This is where the narrative converges with our central theme. Our foundational infrastructure exists under a sky that is occasionally subject to invisible potent threats. You cannot visually detect a coronal mass ejection with the naked eye unless it manifests as auroras. You cannot feel fluctuations in the magnetic field unless you are operating highly sensitive instruments. However, these events are undeniably real, possess immense power, and are utterly indifferent to our technological reliance. The Sun has no concern for the fact that we have constructed a civilization contingent upon stable electromagnetic conditions. It will continue its processes unchanged, as it has for the past 4.5 billion years. Mitigation strategies are available. Satellite operators can place spacecraft into a protective safe mode during solar storms. Power grid managers can install devices designed to block excessive currents in transformers. GPS systems can employ ground-based augmentation to enhance accuracy during periods of heightened space weather activity. Nevertheless, all of these represent reactive measures. We are incapable of preventing solar storms. Our efforts are limited to attempting to minimize the damage when they occur. Furthermore, even these preparations are contingent upon our ability to detect them in a timely manner. Most coronal mass ejections provide us with warning times ranging from 18 to 72 hours. While this is adequate for preparation if well organized, it is insufficient for fundamentally altering our existing infrastructure. The event that transpired on May 10th connects to the narrative of 3I Atlas in a compelling manner. Even if the comet itself was not a direct cause of any specific event, its timing serves as a potent reminder of the interconnectedness between celestial phenomena and Earth's systems. Our Sun is a variable star. Its energy output fluctuates. These fluctuations have measurable effects upon us. Now envision a scenario where we lacked the solar monitoring satellites. Imagine if the Space Weather Prediction Center was not continuously observing the Sun. We would have absolutely no forewarning. Satellites would simply begin to malfunction. Power grids would experience inexplicable failures. GPS signals would drift, leaving us to ponder what unseen force had reached down from the heavens to disrupt our meticulously constructed systems. This represents another blind spot, another instance where we can detect a threat but are powerless to prevent it. This brings us into the domain of artificial intelligence and our increasing dependence on digital systems, our ultimate frontier of vulnerability. Part 14. AI Infrastructure Attack. Major AI Platform Service Lockout. On July 23, 2025, at approximately 11:15 a.m. Eastern Time, OpenAI's API services ceased to function entirely. They did not slow down or degrade. They were completely unavailable. The status page was updated within minutes, citing a technical explanation, an authentication service failure that cascaded to all dependent systems. Users attempting to access ChatGPT encountered endless loading screens. Developers whose applications relied on GPT-4 or daily API calls found their services simply stopped responding. This outage persisted for 7 hours and 43 minutes. During this interval, thousands of businesses that had integrated AI into their operational workflows were starkly confronted with the extent of their dependence. This was not merely an inconvenience, it constituted an infrastructure failure at a novel layer of the technological stack. Consider the scope of the impact. Customer service chatbots fell silent, forcing human agents to manage call volumes for which they had not been staffed in months. Content moderation systems, which utilized AI to identify problematic posts, ceased their operations, compelling companies to either permit all content unfiltered or suspend user submissions entirely. Code completion tools, essential for developers, became inaccessible, noticeably impeding software development progress. Educational platforms employing AI tutors were unable to deliver lessons. Healthcare applications leveraging AI for preliminary diagnostics returned error messages. The underlying cause was revealed days later in OpenAI's incident report. A database migration within their authentication layer had introduced a subtle bug that only manifested under specific load conditions. When traffic reached a particular threshold that morning, the authentication service began to fail silently. Instead of issuing proper error codes to reject requests, it simply ceased to respond. This triggered cascading timeouts across all API endpoints. By the time engineers pinpointed the issue, the authentication database had been corrupted to such an extent that a simple rollback of the migration was impossible. They were forced to restore from a backup, rebuild indices, and meticulously bring systems back online incrementally. Herein lies the significance of this event, extending beyond OpenAI specifically. Artificial intelligence has emerged as a new layer of infrastructure, positioned between applications and end users, responsible for making decisions, generating content, analyzing data, and automating processes. While operational, its presence is largely imperceptible. However, when it fails, the extent to which numerous processes relied upon it suddenly becomes apparent. This pattern mirrors our experience with cloud infrastructure and network backbones. A technology becomes so useful and dependable that it is integrated into virtually every facet of operations. Consequently, when it fails, the ramifications are immense because no contingency plans were made for its absence. The issue of centralization is even more pronounced with AI than with cloud services. While there are 3 major cloud providers with substantial market share and dozens of telecommunications companies managing backbone infrastructure, the landscape for advanced AI services and large language models is dominated by perhaps 5 entities: OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, Microsoft, and Meta. If you require cutting-edge AI capabilities, you are likely utilizing one of their platforms. Should that platform experience an outage, your alternative options are extremely limited. You cannot simply switch to another provider instantaneously. As the models differ, the APIs are distinct, and your applications were specifically developed for a particular system. Consider this analogy. If the cloud represents the highway, then artificial intelligence functions as the autopilot. Your applications are analogous to cars traveling on this highway with the autopilot engaged. For the most part, this system operates flawlessly. The autopilot handles the more tedious aspects of driving, makes decisions more rapidly than humans could, and generally enhances efficiency. But what occurs if the autopilot disengages mid-journey? Suddenly, every vehicle requires immediate human intervention to regain control. However, the human drivers are not readily available because the system was designed with the expectation of autopilot functionality. Some vehicles might be able to pull over safely. Others might simply coast to a halt wherever they happen to be, and a few might crash if they encounter situations demanding immediate decision-making. The outage on July 23rd impacted an estimated 40,000 businesses globally. The majority of these businesses experienced service restoration and recovered within hours. However, several companies reported instances of data loss because their applications were not engineered to handle prolonged periods of AI service unavailability. They had developed workflows that presumed the AI would always respond within seconds. When this expectation was unmet, requests accumulated, buffers overflowed, and data was irretrievably lost. This represents a design flaw that arises when infrastructure becomes excessively reliable. Engineers tend to forego building robust error handling mechanisms because failures are sufficiently infrequent that the additional development effort appears unwarranted. This oversight becomes apparent only when a failure occurs, revealing all the instances where operations were assumed to proceed without interruption. The speculative dimension of this situation becomes particularly intriguing when examining the timing. The OpenAI outage occurred in July. The Mediterranean cable disruptions took place in March. The AWS outage we discussed coincided with the period of the 3I Atlas conjunction. These are distinct events, each with its own set of causes, impacting separate systems, yet all represent infrastructure failures. Each created blind spots where services that should have been accessible were unexpectedly absent. And remarkably, all of these occurred within the same year, 2025. A year that is proving to be exceptionally noteworthy from the perspective of infrastructure vulnerability. Could an AI platform failure coincide with other blind spot events, thereby amplifying the overall impact? Absolutely. Imagine if the OpenAI outage had occurred on the same day as a major cloud provider failure, or during a solar storm affecting satellites, or concurrently with a telecommunications backbone issue. While individual failures might be manageable, a combination of these events could prove catastrophic, as the fallback systems would also likely be compromised. Businesses would simultaneously lose AI capabilities, cloud connectivity, and network access. At such a juncture, we would no longer be addressing a single infrastructure failure, but rather a systemic collapse across multiple layers of dependency. The terminology we employ when discussing AI infrastructure is telling. We speak of AI services being available or unavailable as if they were natural resources, akin to water or electricity. In a sense, they are indeed becoming utilities. You typically do not consider the source of your electricity until the power goes out. Similarly, businesses often do not contemplate their reliance on AI until the API ceases to respond. This utility mindset fosters vulnerability, as utilities are generally assumed to be consistently reliable. When they are not, contingency plans are often non-existent, because the implicit backup plan has always been to await the utility's return to service. OpenAI's incident report included recommendations for developers. These included implementing proper retry logic, gracefully handling timeouts, and considering caching AI responses for critical operational paths. These are sound engineering practices, but they also signify a fundamental shift in perspective. AI is not a form of magic. It is infrastructure, and infrastructure is susceptible to failure. Designing for AI availability necessitates planning for AI unavailability. This involves establishing modes for degraded functionality. It requires accepting the possibility that the autopilot might disconnect and that manual control must be readily available. The broader question pertains to the implications as AI becomes increasingly integrated into our systems. Currently, AI outages are primarily an inconvenience, disrupting business operations and causing user frustration. However, we are rapidly transitioning toward a future where AI will make consequential decisions, impacting areas such as loan approvals, medical diagnoses, autonomous vehicle navigation, and large-scale content moderation. When the AI responsible for these critical decisions becomes unavailable, what becomes of the decisions that needed to be made during that period? Do they languish awaiting resolution? Are they delegated to human operators untrained for such volumes? Are they handled by inferior backup systems? Or are they simply never made, leading to gaps and delays that propagate through interconnected systems? This represents the nascent frontier of vulnerability. We developed cloud infrastructure and gained an understanding of centralization risks. We established telecommunications networks and became aware of physical choke points. Now, as we build AI infrastructure, we are poised to learn about cognitive dependency. What will transpire when the systems we rely upon for thought, decision-making, and content generation abruptly cease to function? We are likely to discover the answer sooner than anticipated. Because if the year 2025 has taught us anything, it is that our blind spots are numerous, our infrastructure is inherently fragile, and failures have a propensity to occur at precisely the most inopportune moments. What lies ahead? What aspects demand our attention? Where do we proceed from this juncture? Part 15. Looking forward. What to watch and where we go from here. This narrative is far from complete. In reality, we are only at its nascent stages. Several significant milestones are approaching that will undoubtedly shape our comprehension of the confluence of events we have been discussing. These are not speculative predictions, but rather scheduled occurrences, observations that will either validate the narrative we have constructed or compel us to re-evaluate our entire framework. In either scenario, careful attention is warranted. The period spanning late November and early December of 2025 is anticipated to be the window for the reacquisition of 3I Atlas. The comet will re-emerge from its conjunction with the Sun, becoming observable once more by Earth-based telescopes. This represents a critical juncture. The moment of truth. Astronomers will immediately commence an assessment of any alterations in its trajectory, luminosity, or observed behavior. They will meticulously compare pre-conjunction data with post-conjunction observations. If 3I Atlas appears unchanged, we can gain greater confidence that it is behaving as a typical comet. However, if it exhibits deviations from expected behavior, if its orbital path has shifted more than can be accounted for by solar gravity alone, or if it displays unusual activity, the implications will rapidly become a subject of intense discussion. Pay close attention to scientific papers and observational reports that emerge in December. The astronomical community will be monitoring this event with extreme diligence. Furthermore, we anticipate the release of forensic postmortems from Amazon Web Services and other cloud providers concerning the infrastructure failures that transpired earlier this year. The preparation of these reports typically requires several months, involving extensive analysis of logs, reconstruction of incident timelines, and rigorous internal review. The AWS outage that coincided with the 3I Atlas conjunction is expected to have a detailed post-mortem published by late 2025 or early 2026. It is imperative to seek out this document. Focus your attention on the root cause analysis section. Be particularly attentive to any mentions of external factors, unusual timing, or unexplained circumstances. While cloud providers generally strive for transparency regarding their service disruptions, they also possess inherent incentives to minimize any findings that might suggest vulnerability to external interference. Therefore, it is crucial to read between the lines. Solar Cycle 25 is currently approaching its peak intensity, projected to occur sometime between late 2025 and mid-2026. This indicates that we are entering a phase of elevated risk from space weather phenomena. An increased number of sunspots translates directly to more frequent solar flares and a higher probability of coronal mass ejections being directed towards Earth. The near miss experienced on May 10th served as a preliminary warning. The next such event may not be so fortunate. Organizations such as the Space Weather Prediction Center regularly disseminate forecasts and real-time alerts. For individuals concerned with the resilience of critical infrastructure, these updates should be a priority. Monitor alerts for X-class solar flares, track predictions of CME trajectories, and observe how essential infrastructure systems respond. The solar maximum period will undoubtedly test our preparedness in ways not experienced since the peak of the previous cycle in 2013 and 2014. Efforts to enhance the resilience of cloud infrastructure are accelerating in response to recent disruptions. The United Kingdom has already enacted regulations designating major cloud providers as critical third parties subject to government oversight. The European Union is actively considering similar regulatory frameworks. In the United States, discussions regarding the resilience of cloud infrastructure are underway at the federal level, although the implementation of concrete policy changes tends to be a gradual process. Nevertheless, the overarching trend is clear. Governments are increasingly recognizing the paramount importance of cloud infrastructure, deeming it too critical to be left solely to the dynamics of market forces. Watch for the emergence of new regulations pertaining to redundancy requirements, mandates for geographic distribution of data centers, and obligations for enhanced transparency. While these measures may not entirely prevent all failures, they have the potential to significantly reduce the scope of impact when such events do occur. The discourse surrounding multi-cloud strategies is also evolving. Corporations are increasingly recognizing that concentrating all their infrastructure assets with a single cloud provider represents an unacceptable level of risk. However, adopting a multi-cloud approach presents its own set of challenges, including significant expense and complexity. It necessitates maintaining compatibility across diverse platforms, managing multiple billing relationships, and providing staff with training on disparate systems. Nevertheless, the alternative, complete reliance on a single provider, is progressively being viewed as an imprudent course of action. Be attentive to announcements from major corporations detailing their multi-cloud strategies and observe the development of tools and services designed to facilitate easier multi-cloud deployments. This is the direction in which the market is shifting. So, what are the key takeaways from this intricate narrative? What fundamental understandings should the viewer seeking to make sense of these complex events retain? Firstly, both our digital and astronomical observational capabilities possess inherent blind spots. We have developed remarkable systems for scrutinizing the universe and managing our technological infrastructure. However, these systems are not infallible. They contain gaps and limitations, and they are susceptible to failures, both predictable and unpredictable. Acknowledging these blind spots is the foundational step towards achieving true resilience. Secondly, coincidental occurrences, such as those we have examined, serve to illuminate existing vulnerabilities, even in the absence of any evidence of malicious intent. Significant problems can arise without the need for a conspiracy. Simply the simultaneous existence of multiple systems with inherent fragility within a complex environment can be sufficient. At times, these fragilities align purely by chance. When this happens, the consequences can be dramatic. The critical question is not whether 3i Atlas was the direct cause of the AWS outage, but rather why a single cloud region failure could result in such a cascading impact, and why we are only now beginning to seriously address this concern. Thirdly, resilience must be cultivated across multiple dimensions. Resilient infrastructure necessitates diversification, not merely duplication. Establishing 2 data centers in the same geographic region does not confer resilience against regional disasters. Employing 2 cloud providers that rely on the same underlying network backbone offers no protection against backbone failures. True resilience demands geographic distribution, vendor diversity, and the capacity for graceful degradation under duress. It also requires transparency. When failures occur, we need detailed and honest postmortems that facilitate collective learning and improvement. Secrecy breeds vulnerability. Fourthly, observation is paramount. Whether we are discussing celestial observation or infrastructure monitoring, it is impossible to address problems that remain unseen. The interception of object designation 2550919 alpha, identified as IceCube, was facilitated by the deployment of a specialized sensor and the diligent oversight of the resulting information stream. Similarly, our awareness of disruptions to the undersea cable network spanning the Mediterranean region stemmed from the persistent vigilance of telecommunications providers, who continuously analyze network traffic patterns. Our preparedness for the solar disturbance that occurred in May was a direct consequence of orbiting platforms dedicated to perpetual observation of the Sun. Such vigilance is not a passive endeavor. Rather, it constitutes an active strategy of readiness for occurrences that are, with certainty, destined to manifest. Now for a call to decisive action. Prioritize the forthcoming disclosures. When the findings pertaining to the reacquisition of the 3i Atlas spacecraft are disseminated, engage with the details. Upon the release of incident analyses by cloud service providers, thoroughly examine them. During periods of solar maximum activity and resultant space weather events, diligently follow the unfolding updates. Refrain from accepting singular explanations for intricate situations. Systemic failures are frequently the product of multiple contributing factors acting in concert. Accounts that attribute everything to a solitary cause are typically too simplistic. Cultivate a mindset of inquisitive skepticism. Pose probing questions. Insist on openness and accountability from those who manage critical infrastructure and established organizations. Consider your own points of vulnerability. Envision the ramifications of an extended internet outage, perhaps lasting a day or a week. What if the global positioning system experiences unreliability? What if the artificial intelligence instruments you rely on abruptly cease to function? These are no longer theoretical possibilities. They represent actual events that have transpired in the year 2025 and are poised to recur. Establishing personal fortitude involves formulating contingency plans for periods of compromised infrastructure. It entails relinquishing the assumption that the systems we depend on will perpetually remain operational, regardless of whether the 3 Atlas craft exerted any influence or not. This juncture serves as a stark reminder of a fundamental truth. When communication channels go silent and celestial phenomena obscure their subjects, what crucial insights are we missing? Are we equipped to confront the next unanticipated blind spot? Because there will assuredly be a subsequent one. It might manifest as another extraterrestrial entity exhibiting peculiar attributes. It could be another cascading failure within cloud computing infrastructure, coincident with other disruptions. Perhaps it will be a solar flare exceeding predicted intensity. It is even conceivable that it will be something entirely beyond our current contemplation, lurking within undiscovered vulnerabilities. The cosmos is under no obligation to provide us with forewarnings. Technological systems are not inherently guaranteed to be dependable. Events will invariably unfold, some readily observable, others concealed, some profoundly impactful, others unremarkable. Our obligation is to observe, to absorb knowledge, to construct systems capable of withstanding disruption, and to acknowledge that occasional astonishment is inevitable. The pertinent question is whether we will be taken by surprise and find ourselves unprepared, or be surprised yet possess the means to adapt. This is the juncture of choice, the essence of what is at risk. Therefore, continue to scrutinize the heavens. Persist in monitoring the interconnected networks. Maintain your questioning of discrepancies. And recall that the most significant revelations, whether concerning the cosmos or our own planet, frequently emerge from diligent attention to details that others have disregarded. These overlooked areas, the blind spots, are the very locations where the most compelling discoveries are made. They are also, however, the sites of potential peril. Increasingly, we are confronting the reality that these two domains intersect far more than we are comfortable admitting. The ensuing chapter of this unfolding narrative is being composed at this very moment. Whether its characters include visitors from beyond our solar system, breakdowns in our technological infrastructure, or something entirely unforeseen, its genesis will be rooted in the present blind spots that we have yet to eliminate. And when this next event materializes, our earnest hope is that we will be watchful and prepared. However, if a historical precedent is any indicator, we will likely not be. We will experience surprise once more. We will hastily devise countermeasures. We will pledge to implement improvements in the future. And this cycle will persist until we fundamentally reevaluate our conceptualization of resilience, our methodology of observation, and the discomforting verity that our perception is perpetually incomplete and our dominion is invariably constrained. Welcome to the era ahead. It is delicate, it is captivating, and it is replete with phenomena that have eluded our notice. Remain attentive.